This is PPD. You guys are watching Thorn's YouTube channel. One of the only men with a bigger ego than even myself.
Okay, I'm here for another episode in my Reflections interview series, and this one is going to be with my guest, 7ckngMad, who was the coach of OG, but then he just decided to start playing and just win the international anyway. So it's one way to do it, certainly, right? So 7ckngMad, obviously your career has been a long one, and there's a lot we can get into. And actually, one of the reasons I was interested to do this interview is not just because you won the international now, but because you have been someone who's been more behind the scenes. I mean, on camera sometimes as an analyst, but more behind the scenes during a lot of Dota2's era. And so some people probably aren't as familiar with your history. So actually, just to start out with, almost all the people from your generation were playing Dota 1 in some capacity. And I know because at the time I was around esports. Dota 1 as an esport was very, very much like on the side. It wasn't even like a secondary, but it was almost like a tertiary one. Like it had some LANs, it was its own community. But, you know, if we had the big tournaments, this wasn't the game everyone was looking at. But I noticed a lot of those people stuck around and were either the first generation pros or some of them amazingly continue to this day. And I think that's incredible. So who were you in Dota 1? I mean, you must have been fairly young, right?
Yeah, that's I was pretty young at that point. I think I was probably 7 or 8 years younger, so that takes me to maybe 14 or something. Actually, even more than that, maybe 15, something around these lines. I mean, at first I was nobody. I guess I was just a guy that liked the game a lot and wanted to grind and try to. I remember back then the struggle for me was to try to get to play with better players. So I was getting in these like random games on Battle.net, and I was doing pretty fine. And then I just, as soon as I spotted the better player, I would start harassing him, messaging him, being like, yo, where do you usually play? Any chance I can play with you somewhere? Is there a league or anything? And then that took me later to Dota League, I think. I don't quite remember. Some French in-houses where like people are like, who the hell is this guy? Like he's beyond awful. Like who let that guy in? And I would just play and try to sneak my way in, get better, watch the replays, and, you know, just take it step by step.
Okay, so as far as I know, from what I remember of when I used to have to write the news posts for the big Dota tournaments, etc., the best teams in the world were from like China, Southeast Asia, and there was a few teams from Europe that was very good. Like obviously there was some like Danish players, etc. As far as I remember, France wasn't particularly in the top in Dota 1. So what was the path? Like, for example, when Dota 2 came out, was it even a possibility to become in one of the best teams? Like was the French scene itself behind?
Yeah, I think actually my first tournaments were in Dota 1. So I ended up playing in some French in-houses with what was at that time the best French players. Some of them were pretty relevant on the scene. They would play in teams called Against All Authority or Serious Gaming, and these teams could take games here like once in a while from teams like MYM, or was it Navi at that point? Maybe it wasn't. It was like DTS, MYM were like the really big teams. Okay, Nirvana, these type of teams were like back in the days, Misery, Fear, Demon, these players, Malk, these players were pretty big. Mania, some retired players from Dota 1, like some Dota 1 legends. Of course, on the other side of the globe, you had like really big Chinese super houses at that point already, and also other regions. But I got picked up by like, I ended up playing like alongside the best French players. At that point, these players were like Mal de Jambes or Mal de Jambe in French. Sox was one of the best French players, and they just ended up picking me up, and I was just standing in for them here and there until I started being like one of the permanent members of the team. I think my first tournament was probably ESWC. Okay. Back then, and it was in Dota 1. It was a disaster for me. I crumbled to the pressure. It was my first like really big tournament. I mean, they told me I did fine. In hindsight, I probably did fine, but I was really, really disappointed with myself. It was a big eye opener to that competition was much more than just you playing the game. But yeah, that's all I can remember.
Mean, to for a second drag us back to the present, obviously the way OG just won the international is the exact opposite of this. The team was amazing under pressure in scenarios where, you know, many other teams would mentally sort of give up and GG out the game. When did you start to actually like get rid of nerves, any kind of performance anxiety, and just play however well you were playing? How early in your career did you manage that, do you think?
I mean, I ended up managing it really well. So the thing is, that first tournament, I remember it very, very clearly. I was really disappointed with myself, mainly because I never looked at myself as someone that like crumbles to pressure.
Sure.
Just in life, it's something I actually enjoy. But that tournament just caught me off guard, and I got very. I was kind of mad. Yeah, I was just mad at myself that I let that happen, and I ended up. I wanted to build my my what I could bring to a tournament. I wanted to be the guy that actually performs better under pressure, because that's just the image that I had of the person I was, and it's what it ended up being pretty quickly. It's hard for me to know exactly when it ended up being the case, but all the tournaments that happened after, I felt like I was performing much better in tournaments instead of like just online and stuff. So that tournament was really the only one where I felt like I let myself down. It was just like everything, playing in a professional team at that level with the things at stake, with people watching you. It was just too much at the same time. And it just got better pretty quickly after, until it actually became a thing where like, it's the only thing I wanted is to get to these tournaments, because I knew that these tournaments were the only place I could actually prove myself. Like, yeah.
Okay. So in the early days in Dota 2, when the game had just come out, we'd had the first international, and you made your inroads with this team, Team Shikara. Now, this is a team where, obviously, like for the context of this interview and all the highs of your career, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. It's not that relevant, you know. It's basically in the dark ages of Dota 2. But I thought the interesting part was that you did play with a couple of these players, as you mentioned, Sockshka and Funzii. These are two players you played with for many years, basically in nearly all the lineups. Obviously, Sockshka later on called Paris, for people who remember that name change. Now, these are two players who were basically almost permanent teammates of yours for a number of years. So who were these guys? Like, why did you stick with these players? Because I think as the interview emerges, it's a theme, right? That you are someone where when you find someone who you kind of understand them, you stick with them, right?
Yeah, I mean, so Sox was the guy that brought me to professional Dota. I mean, or like to the highest level of professional Dota in a sense. Of course, then we helped each other get there and like to become more and more competitive as a team and as players. But he was the one that really believed in me. He was the one that gave me my first real chance. So that's how we started playing together. I think Funzii came a little bit later, where like we just like found him. He was like a very talented, very nice guy to have around. He was just really, really good. So ended up playing with him too. These two, I mean, it's mainly Sox to be honest, but Funzii, we stick together for a pretty long time. But he had some motivation issues where he wasn't exactly sure whether that's what he wanted to keep doing or not. As for Sox and I, it was very clear that we wanted to win TI. We wanted to like just be as good as we could ever get, and we were willing to sacrifice whatever it took, pretty much. So, and the way we looked at the game, and up until today, like I still go back to talks that I had with Sox, and a lot of things we talked about back then and things we really believed in ended up getting confirmed, even during this TI win. I always go back to how that guy looked at the game and how I looked at it also, and how we just like helped each other's get better and understand the game better and obviously play better. But everything back then, I really realized later that we were ahead of most of the players that we played with. I think we just had a better understanding and just a better vision of like what a team needed and stuff. But we just never. Obviously, we also had a lot of flaws, I guess. With I mean, we learned also what we were doing wrong along the way, and sometimes too late. Sometimes you just realize too late that this is something you were not doing optimally. But either way, I do think that also conditions were not optimal for us. I think we just never, we were not set properly for success, I would say. I think had we played together a little bit later or came to competitive a little bit later, we would have had much more success, because the scene was not mature back then. Like there was not many good players or good teams. So you had to just create that experience by yourself. Whereas today, new players, they're almost always going to be with very experienced players. Where it's funny because I look at Dota, the competitive scene as Dota, where like we rewrote the book of sports pretty much in a way, you know, like we did we did these mistakes because we're like the first generation of players to that level of competition. So we had to go through this all together and try to figure it out. And every year that passes, the entire set of teams just gets much better and much smarter. Just because you have these players that go from one team to the other and they just share whatever experience and knowledge they have of the highest level of competition, and yeah, that's all that makes it great. And I think that's why all the teams are improving that much also when it comes to how to tackle practice, how to deal with the pressure, all these things. Back then we didn't have that, so we try to learn by ourselves, and we were sometimes successful, sometimes we hit the wall.
Well, since you alluded there to like some of the things you learned with this guy Socks, things that later on were confirmed, like you didn't get the chance to necessarily implement them then, or at least the team couldn't win in the same way. Give us some insight into a little bit of that. Like, give us a teaser, perhaps tying into like how he saw the game and who he was as a player.
It's hard to give too much insight, but what I can say is that he had just some simple concepts. Let me think of something that I could be talking about. I mean, a very simple thing is how to now it's very like all the teams are very smart about this, like how to use resources in a game, as in like which hero do you want to help be strong at a certain moment in the game or not, just because this approach where you want, so back then you wanted the carry to get as much farm as he could ever get. You know, back then sending the carry to the offlane, it was not only stupid, it was like suicidal. Like that guy is the carry, and by definition the carry wants to take the most space at all stages of the game. Now teams are pretty smart, and you see these teams like they understand that no matter what, this whatever Spectre or whatever people have played at the TI, he's not gonna get off to a good start anyway. And maybe him getting off to a good start in that game specifically is not. I mean, of course, ideally you want everybody to get off to a good start. But if you have to pick, maybe helping your offlaner in the beginning might be much better this game because of a lot of different reasons. That guy back in the days was already looking at these things where like he was a carry player himself, and he would understood. He would be like, sometimes it's just sack you guys. Like in this game, I don't want you to look at my game. I don't think it's good. And he was getting a lot of criticism because people will call him just like straight up really bad carry player. Like that game, he got completely shut down. He's just very bad. He never got on, but he actually won us the game by looking at the game in a very different way. So this is just a good example. And people back then, most of the Dota players would not understand these things, and they ended up understanding them later because they looked at some games where they're like, oh, how come they still won the game even though that Spectre got completely crushed for 30 minutes? He never had an impact, yet they won the game. And anyway, these type of things.
So like the mentality back then, I mean, I'm already thinking of like a lot of the Chinese teams who obviously played with the amazing carries. Their mentality was like, you have to get the carry ahead no matter what. And even if you're losing the game, he just has to try and win all the team fights at the end or something.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm not exactly sure what their mentality was, but the way they played, it definitely looked like it was this way. And I know for a fact that a lot of players that I played with, they were pretty stuck on this way of looking at the game. But then you have some guys that just look like they don't. There's not even, I was going to say they look outside of the box, but there's actually not even a box in their world. They just look at the game and they come up with stuff that's just their own. And sometimes it matches the meta or like the general belief. Sometimes it doesn't. And they don't really care. And I'd like to think I'm one of these guys too. And sometimes they just do it better and everybody just copies them. It's very simple. It's just a very simple approach. Is that you just have to be confident in your read pretty much. That's all it takes to get there.
Okay. So why did this guy, Socks, why didn't he continue? Like, if you look at when he basically quit playing, it's where if you were advising someone in terms of like, if you want to make prize money and be like legendary, that's exactly the time you wouldn't quit, basically. It was like when everything was really starting to get massive. So why did he stop?
It's actually the very precise talk I had with him. I told him that, dude, like, this is not a good moment for you to just quit. You might regret it or not, and I really hope you don't, but I think you're going to look back at these TIs and you're going to be like, I probably should have been part of this. I think he rested on his laurels a little bit too much. I think he didn't, he was very talented, like extremely talented, and he never had to work really hard to be one of the best players. And I think when that time came, because there was a period in Dota where like most of the pro players, they would not grind the game 10 hours a day. Like if they would, it was just out of like just pleasure, but you could still, like these top teams, they could just not play for 2 weeks together or 3 weeks, and then they would come, show up, and just crush everybody because the competition was not as tough as it is today. Today, if you slack, all these newcomers, all these like pop grinders, they're gonna take over, and by the time you actually have to grind as much as them or close to it. You need to be on top of your game at all times. You just can't rest. If you start resting on your laurels, like you lose your spot, and that's kind of what happened to him. And I think when he realized it a little bit too late, so that he had like a lot of work he had a lot of catch up work to do, and that with real life catching up and stuff, I think he just never did it, which is a shame, I think. But at the same time, he did something else in his life, which I'm sure is amazing. So this is not a judgment I'm having, but it's just if I'm going to be selfish, I wanted to see that guy persevere in Dota. But obviously that was his own choice, and yeah, you can only respect it.
So obviously one of the notable organizations you played for was MTW back when that was still like a known org, you know, that had a big name, obviously from other games as well. And in this team, as I said, you did take these French guys with you, but the most notable player of the team was obviously syndereN, who to this day still flirts with playing, is not better known obviously as a commentator and a mind of the game. What was it like to play with him? Obviously he's someone who was more experienced, right? So what was his kind of take on the game, and what was this team like?
Playing with Sin has been a very good experience. I mean, he's a very well spoken person. I think he's very charismatic as a leader, in the sense that he just makes it very easy for people to work together. I think he just has an approach that is it's just very good, very solid. And yeah, generally, like he helps build very solid and very healthy foundations to a team. Which is a very good thing to have. So that was mostly what he brought to the team. Like he just set the team in the right track. Yeah, like pretty much instantly back then in MTW. Like there was a big gap between pre-Sin and post, and when Sin came on board, because everything just got better in terms of like preparation, in terms of how we approached the game, how we communicated with each other's. Yeah.
Okay. One of the big results when you joined this team was you won DreamHack Summer, where you were able in the final to beat Na'Vi, who obviously were the TI champions. I mean, I think they'd done like one roster move then or something. I think it was the support player they changed. But this was the lineup where, for everyone who doesn't remember, it was one of the classic lineups where, for example, they still had one of my favorite players, Light of Heaven, who was kind of a godlike player in his own way. This must be a big deal, right? If you come from Dota 1 and then you've been at the beginning of Dota 2 to beat this team online.
Yeah, that was definitely at that point the absolute biggest highlight of our careers, like all of us, because this was Na'Vi that was trying really hard and that was undefeated. I think when we beat them on LAN, because there was also this thing about like what it means to beat a team online or versus in a LAN environment.
Sure.
So that only thing that mattered back then was what happened in LANs. Online was like very hectic. It just didn't count. That was like the kind of the untold story between pro players. Like whatever happens online, it doesn't matter. When we get to LAN, people get real, and everything that happens in LAN matters. So you get recognized from what you achieved in LANs back then. Na'Vi was I think undefeated for like 20 games or 20 series. I don't even remember. It was like they were just like pretty much unbeatable, that team. And obviously all the Dota players, you look up to Na'Vi. Like they were like the absolute best team. They were super scary. It's like this team that they just crush everybody if they play a little bit serious. And so us beating them convincingly, I don't remember if it was a best of 5 or whatnot, but it was like
best of 3.
Oh, best of 3. I mean, we just dominated them in the finals. Like there was no doubt that we were the better team. At least that very day, we were obviously not the better team, generally speaking. But that day, we were the better team, and we beat them very convincingly. And we got a lot of respect from them and from the whole scene after beating Na'Vi that day. And just for us, it was like we went from being these kids that just like watch Na'Vi play and just also like fake nick the Na'Vi players. You know, like I remember being myself, Na'Vi Light of Heaven, playing pubs, you know, because my dream was to be Na'Vi Light of, and then just like crush him in the best of 3 or best of 5 series, whatever. You definitely realize that we took a very big step today. So you know, let's just keep moving forward. But it felt great. It felt great. It gives you a lot of hope and confidence that you must be doing something right if that's where you got. Yeah.
So obviously one of the things that makes it tough to talk about old results in a game like Dota, contrasted to like Counter-Strike, for example, is sure, there's definitely an evolving meta of how you play spots or maps, etc. But you know, the map generally has the same layout and generally the same concepts exist of how roles work and stuff. So in Dota, the problem always is, unless someone was there, it's hard to kind of drop a marker and say, what was the meta like? How did teams even play back then? So you touched on some of this earlier when you were talking about Socks, which is, this was obviously before the days where people even played the try offlane. You know, they didn't have any of the setup that became famous around, I think that was like TI3, was it maybe? It was around 2013 or something like that meta came into play. So what was it like back at this point in time? Like, first of all, you were obviously a support player. You weren't offlane. You weren't in what people might know later. So what was your role like? How did you think of how that a support is supposed to play? And then what was the just more general meta? Obviously, you don't need to know all the heroes, but just generally, how did teams conceive of the game?
Oh, I remember it pretty clearly, actually. This one of the funny things with Dota is like, you remember almost everything, at least for me. Like, I remember most of the matches pretty precisely, and the meta also. I mean, back then, people were stuck a lot. I mean, it was already pretty diversified, but let's put it this way. Like, if someone just came up, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but like if someone would come up with like dual laning mid, for example, and it would work. Obviously, if it's a big failure, people would be like, "Oh, these guys are just like trying to be cool." But if it starts working, then it will break the meta. So the meta, people were breaking the meta pretty often, and not on the back of like these days when you break the meta, it's mostly because a patch happened, or someone just figures out something. But it doesn't happen every second day. Back then, it would happen extremely often. You had like a very simple example is like people would play Clockwork offlane and they would not use cogs. Cogs were there like the entire time.
Sure.
And they would rocket and block the small camp to prevent people from pulling, right? And they would just get completely bullied, get no XP, but they were like, they can't pull the small camp, so they can't. So my safe lane is getting more XP than their safe lane. So like all in all, this is a win. And then one guy one day, God knows why, he maybe misclicked, you know, and then he cocked the wave accidentally or something, or he's just a genius. I don't know. I mean, today it doesn't even sound like he was a genius back then. But trust me, like if people had done this, like one specific thing for thousands of games, and then that guy just cocks the waves back, and now he just dumps their safe lane like completely. That guy just broke the game just by doing so, you know. And now Clock offlane is completely broken pick, and people try to think of ways to counter it, and then another guy is like, I can probably block the wave with Fisher, the same that guy does with the. Anyway, like these things kept happening like constantly. It would be item builds, it would be hero combinations. People were like, I would say that people were like investigating and like getting in deeper knowledge of the game every day, and that would apply to a lot of things. At the same time, the game was evolving, and game-related things would also break the meta in the sense that I don't remember when Goldgraph appeared, for example, but to me that was a huge change in Dota, where like when this Goldgraph thing happened, then players started talking about like being ahead or being behind.
Right.
This is a thing I've always talked about in Dota, where like back in my days, being ahead or being behind was not a thing. I mean, it was sometimes. It's like, they got a BKB on that hero, we can't fight them because they have that BKB, and that was it. So the moment where you were going to be able to fight them again it was going to happen. But now these days I see, I mean, of course, fans or casters, but they don't play competitively, so I don't blame them. But like even players, they get affected by this gold thing, right? Where
you go
like
too far sometimes, right? Like sometimes you have
goes
a
way
swing
too
on the
far.
gold graph, but you have the heroes for like 5 minutes from now if you get the right fight.
Yeah, and I'm gonna give you a very simple example that is very easy to understand. Is like a team is ahead, let's say whatever, 4K gold, right? Okay. But they haven't picked up their big items yet. That guy's saving 2K gold, or he's like 1K gold away from BKB. The other guy's 1K. It doesn't matter. They effectively save sometimes up to 10K gold on their heroes, and the other teams they might have spent. So effectively, even the gold argument, like the gold reasoning, is not good because effectively the other team is actually ahead gold-wise. Yes. And even if they weren't, like people. When you start talking about gold and advantage, you're actually looking at numbers. You're not looking at what's in front of you. Like, are you ahead or are you behind? And if you're behind, it means like there's nothing you can do right now to counter their play or counter what they're doing. Or maybe there is something you can do. But what I mean is like the day this gold and XP happened, I I personally didn't like it at all. Of course, it was convenient, but I was like, now people are going to start talking about things they should not talk about. Like, I don't know if it makes sense, but
yeah.
Yeah.
It just becomes like, here's the thing, it could be a good aid to tell you roughly what direction the game's heading in, but people start to think it's like a rigid system. It's like, right, well, we were 4K ahead, so we should have won this game, and, you know, how did we lose that fight? Whereas, like, by the way, the same thing basically roughly occurred in Counter-Strike when we actually got, like, stats for things, you know, because then people would look at the stats and decide if this guy had a good game, whereas, you know, actually maybe for his role, a good game has nothing to do with getting a certain amount of kills. It was like,
exactly.
You know, he set this other guy up, he did so. The problem there is the same thing. Like, it's great as a general concept if someone's not following the minutia, but it's very rarely going to tell you exactly. Like obviously, as you can see with them making this AI now, you can't really know at every point of a game who's literally supposed to win, you know. It's a lot of swings that can happen. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, and the other part was, what was it like to be a support player back then?
The support role was very different. It was much harder to get XP and gold generally. So decisions as support, you could ruin your own game to the point where you're not gonna get a game at all if you did a couple things wrong. So back in the days, playing support, I kind of want to say it was much harder. I think it got much easier these days to play support. Of course, like certain aspects of the game are much harder now, and playing support is obviously still very tricky. But you kind of always get the chance to. Today, I don't feel like there's a scenario where no matter what, your game is going to be completely destroyed unless you do many mistakes in a row. Back then, let's say you go to the wrong lane, you skill the wrong spell, you might just be done. Like, you're always going to be play from behind, and the XP mechanic was not the same as today. I think it was like kind of the same for every hero. So there was no such thing that, like, nowadays, if a very low hero kills a really high levels like hero, or like there's a big team fight,
yes,
where the low level heroes they benefit so much, they get back in the game. Back then you would not get back in the game.
There's no comeback mechanic.
Yeah, the team thing was not as strong. It's like you had to figure out a way to get back, like by yourself. And as a support, obviously, that you don't get that space in the game. So there was much more pressure on support players to do the right decisions. I'm talking very early in the game, especially.
Okay. Right. Even though your team won this dream hack, and as you said, online play at the time was kind of looked down upon because there wasn't that many big lands. And so when people played all these online tournaments, obviously teams like Na'Vi could lose online, but the feeling was like if they got to LAN, of course, they'd beat that team, you know. So online, your team was very good as well. And then I saw just before the international, they had this tournament, Samsung European Encounter, which was like a sub-brand of like the WCG. We used to have something similar in Counter-Strike. And at this tournament, you got upset. You only finished third, and that was right before the international. So was already the writing on the wall that like this team maybe wouldn't do as well when it went into the international? Were there problems?
Actually, for the storyline, that grand finals, we played against a player that just switched to Dota, and his name was S4, and he was playing.
I think he might appear later in the story. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, he was playing for some completely unknown team back then, and I remember telling my team once we lost to them. Obviously, we heavily underperformed, and we had a lot of internal issues in the team, which is the reason for why we underperformed. Yeah, the team we faced, I mean, it was pretty unknown to most of the scene, especially to us also. But they played really well that day. I remember they 3-0'd us also, I think. And back then he was playing Offlane. No, was he? I can't remember. He was playing some. I just remember playing against his Quaswax Invoker, and I told my team, like, that guy, I don't know who that guy is, but that guy is really good at Dota. I mean, there's no shame to lose to these guys. They played amazing. It's just a funny story, but yeah, I mean, we just had a lot of internal issues. I remember we just went through a really heavy boot camp. Back then it was like 2-month boot camp. That's also mistakes we've been doing back then. We were working way too much to the point where it became non-productive at all, and it just like started creating issues more than solving problems. So yeah.
So when you came to TI2, your first international, right? Even though, as I said, like, you know, the results there had been some bumps in the road along the way. The actual storyline of what happened at this tournament was you basically lost to loads of teams from China, Eastern Asia, basically, you know. And at this point in time, for context, this wasn't like now where, you know, the top Chinese teams come to all the tournaments, you know. Back then, you might only see them at the international, right? So was there some kind of like a clash in how they played? Was it a shock to play people you've never played before? What happened at the international?
Oh yeah, it was completely different. It's exactly what you said. Back then, these teams, you would never play these teams throughout the year. The only moment you could play them was at TI. So there was a huge clash of the meta, like the meta they had going there, and even their playstyle was completely unfamiliar. Also back then, replays were not like as easy to use. They were, I don't even remember how accessible they were, but you couldn't just like study teams from across the world and just like understand their playstyle as well as they understand themselves. Back then, yeah, you were just like in the dark when it came to these games. So it was really hard to prepare. You couldn't prepare at all. You just had to. It was a moment thing, like whether you could deal with it like at that very moment or you couldn't. And I mean, just you lose, you don't play them anymore. You might never play them again, or like up until the next year. So it was pretty exciting at the same time. It made these games very special. Yeah, obviously it was a pretty rough TI for us. We had a lot of issues going into that tournament, internally mostly, which prevented us from playing our game pretty much. I think we just didn't show up as a team at all. We lost to teams that we were convincingly beating before. I mean, we were far from being like one of the best teams of the tournament. I think maybe we could have broken to the top 8 had we performed to the best of our abilities. But we were very, very far from it, and we definitely deserved the bottom placement that we got. Yeah, it was a rough tournament.
Being as Na'Vi had won the first international and then a whole bunch of lands, and as you say, they were so dominant everywhere, and obviously the first international mainly was about the top Western teams. Was it a shock for the whole Western scene that the Chinese teams came on so strong at this point in time? Like, did all the Westerners just assume like the West is going to be the best?
No, people knew that China was like extremely good back then. I think the reason why Na'Vi got such an easy TI1 was like that was mostly the shock. That was the biggest shock rather than China dominating TI2. Because the thing that happened with TI1 is that people just didn't believe it was going to happen. So especially the Chinese teams, because they were the best teams in the world.
They kept practicing Dota1 or something silly, right?
Yeah, they just didn't switch because they were like $1 million for a Dota tournament. That's not happening. Even if it was like announced, they didn't believe it. So the best Chinese teams did not show up at TI1. And Na'Vi, they just went for it. They were like, no, it's happening. And they practiced much harder than any other team. They had the most play time, and then they were just like much better than any other team in the world at Dota2. Is the reason why they destroyed the TI1 that easily. TI2, now the competitive scene was what it looked like in Dota1. It's like the powerhouses were there, so obviously China was doing much better as people could have expected.
Okay, so then skipping a little bit forwards, you eventually the next year ended up in this team, the DD.Dota team, which obviously later on became, what was the name of the team? Quantic, that was it.
Quantic
yes,
Gaming,
International. Yeah. Okay, so if people remember this team, you still had Socks, you still had Funzii, but this was the team where you tried like an experimental lineup because you brought in Silent, who obviously later on played in Virtus Pro, Vega Squadron, he's doing Windstrike most recently, and you had as support player, you had Goblak, the Ukrainian player, who at the time had been also with Silent in Empire and was actually later on a coach of Na'Vi, funnily enough. Now, I noticed in interviews, you were very complimentary of Goblak, actually, and he's another person who seems to have kind of like shaped the way you see the game because he was the drafter of the team, right? So what was it like playing with this guy? And was it different to play with Eastern European players? Had you already done it in the past?
No, that was the first time I played with CIS players, and it was very, very different. Their approach to the game, their approach to communication, they're just as human beings also, like it's different. There were a lot of cultural differences that I really enjoyed. I don't mean it in a bad way, I mean it in a very good way, but it is like a human adventure also. So that was great. Obviously, we had to like adapt to each other's, but I mean, it's always the case, right? It was a great experience, and the reason why I was so complimentary of Goblak and Silent also, I mean, Silent is and will always be like one of the best players I ever played with, mechanically speaking. I mean, I've been so impressed by that guy. Goblak, it's like in Dota, at least for me, whenever I meet a player that just like helps me improve quickly and a lot, I just enjoy it that much that I probably I start praising him. Goblak, the way he looked at the game was very unique. At least I haven't met anyone before him that looked at the game the way he did, which made it very exciting to play alongside him. The way he looked at drafting also, everything pretty much. So I just learned a lot alongside Goblak, and this is something I value immensely in Dota. It's the reason why I play Dota, actually. It's actually the only reason why I play this game and why I sacrifice that much for this game. It's just, I just want to improve. The game is so complex, and so I'm so passionate. I have so much passion for that game. So whenever I get the chance to improve, that's why I seek. And Goblak gave me that opportunity.
What was different about his philosophy on drafting?
He had a much simpler way of looking at the game. A very practical and simple way, because you overthink when you invest so much time, and when you think that much, like so much about like drafting, playing,
yes,
you sometimes forget the basics. And some people don't. It's just like different minds, right? Like you're gonna look at how to build like a furniture, and I might just be helpless in front of it, and he's just gonna start picking up pieces and just do it. And it's actually, it was probably very simple to do, but one guy was overthinking and one guy was not. It's just the way you look at things. People look at things differently, and they complement each other's. So I'd say he just had a very basic and simple way of looking at it, but which is in my mouth. It doesn't mean it's not as good as others. It actually means it's much better, because he was looking at what was very crucial, whereas I was sometimes losing myself, like just overthinking. So finding the right balance between things made both of us much better drafters.
Well, this is something, obviously, that when we get later and we're talking about OG, and then obviously even playing in OG, is like that you've had a very unique approach where sometimes the team just basically says like, fuck it, we'll just pick the heroes we want to play, even if it doesn't make meta sense. But as you say here, one of the problems is, because if you're someone who's drafting like that and you're trying to like play the chess game, people do get way too far into those like anime storylines of thinking they have to, like, whatever he's just done there, I've got to do the most genius move as to why like that helps me. It's like you can definitely get lost in some of these drafts, right?
Oh, you can, for sure. What's really important, sometimes you have to go that far. Sometimes it goes like it goes very far sometimes, and it has to. You just need to. You just don't want to do it just for the sake of doing it. You just need to draft pretty much. Like you just need to take a simple approach, and if it takes you to like thinking, I don't know, 5 to 6 steps ahead, then it took you thinking 5 to 6 steps ahead. It doesn't matter. But sometimes if there's a simple solution to it, just go for it.
Okay, so this Quantic team, before we get to TI, you went to a couple of LANs and you had some good performances there. You were back at DreamHack Summer and you got to play against the team. I mean, we talked before about playing Na'Vi. Now you got to play against the Alliance team, who, if everyone remembers, this was the dominant team, They'd even gone over to China and beaten the Chinese over there. So everyone was in awe of them. They obviously, as everyone knows in this storyline, did go on to win the International. So what was like peak Alliance like to play against?
Oh, it was very scary, because the Dota that they played was probably one of the best Dota. At that point, it was probably the best Dota that has ever been played in Dota history. It was, I would say, from my perspective at least, like from a drafter perspective and from a player perspective, and the Dota mind that I was back then, it was like the team that I admired the most, because what they built with the game, it was really well thought, and they built a structure. They had the structure going, like that everybody knew about pretty much, or like you could predict their next pick, like the same day would, like you could predict the 5 heroes they were going to choose, the way they were going to play that strategy, the timings they were going for, like everything. Yet they would destroy you with it completely, because they had covered what people were gonna try to do against it and stuff. I don't really know, because obviously I've never been on that team, but it was just beautiful Dota. Like it was surgical Dota. I like to call it back then. Everything, nothing was left to like. They were in control of everything they were doing. It was thought through. It was practiced. It felt like it. So they were the first to bring that level of execution to Dota. And I'm talking strategical execution, because obviously mechanical execution, that just happens from like really good players playing together or just practice. But they had the mechanical and the strategical execution. They had both.
Yes. Obviously as well, when it got to TI, this was the year where not only did Alliance win, but famously Na'Vi obviously gave them like a great match in the final. And that was the one where it's like, even when you go back and I watched those VODs again recently to do like a video about like the best runs of TI, and even when I was watching the VODs back, like when Navi's playing against like Orange and Tongfu, it's like when you're watching the VODs and you know the result, you still think that the Chinese team's going to win. You're like, there's no way they can win this. Like, this doesn't make sense. So I noticed even years later when you did interviews, you were always very complimentary of Navi in the different lineups as well. And this was obviously, like I say, an era where it wasn't like they were the best team. They were one of the top teams, but they had something special about them as to how they could win. Now, here's a quote you said about them, right? So I want to get your thoughts on them. So you said, Na'Vi players are just more experienced in both the in-game part and the human part. They know how to manage a team in difficult situation and have good, insane game understanding. So can you give me some thoughts of what did like Na'Vi represent back then? Because this is like, there's a lot of teams that couldn't do insane comebacks, you know, and some of the ways that, like, even that they were conceiving to win these games, I don't even really know what they were thinking of myself, but it's amazing to watch.
I mean, to me, Navi back then was like pure. So in the in-game part, it was pure Dota knowledge. It was like thousands of hours of like just grinding the game and just knowing the heroes and having played some of these games before. Experience, knowledge is what it was. I think had you forced Navi versus Alliance back then to play whatever mode that doesn't allow them to pick the heroes that they want, just force them to play like good lineup versus good lineup and force them to play strategies they don't know, Navi would have 3-0 Alliance like every day. I think that's at least that's the read I had on these teams, that Navi would just destroy them like over and over again because their game understanding was wider and better. Like in that sense, it was better, but Alliance understanding of drafting of like Navi could never push Alliance out of their comfort zone, whereas Alliance could do it. And if Alliance were in their comfort zone, then Navi had no chance. That was kind of the rivalry between these two teams. Is the way I looked at it. So Navi was like raw skill, but not unstructured. I think they just didn't use their resources as well as Alliance used theirs. Let's put it this way, which made Alliance a much better team, much more dominant. But I think these teams were closer than people thought. Actually, in terms of like talent and knowledge.
Considering Alliance obviously won more of the games and, you know, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that Navi team was just like pure, raw skill. And I think they just also had a lot more experience, of course, like than the Alliance guys. Like the Navi guys, they had won TI1, they've been in the TI2 finals. Now they get to the TI3 finals. Like these things don't just happen. It's not a coincidence. And it's like they played against Tongfu, the Fountain Hook happened. So that means that's a team that's like back against the wall, yet they keep finding things. Like they're so resourceful that they even like find bugs, or like it wasn't a bug per se, but you know, they find like some really weird things that they started using in the game. That's how much they can pull off their hats to try to win the game. And that resilience is something that is very valuable in Dota. Then they played against Tongfu, Orange it was, sorry, and then the guy just denies the egg. It's like, I believe that these things don't just happen, you know. It's like if it happens once, sure, but it happened so many times that tournament. And then they get against Lions that didn't lose like a single game almost. Like they just destroyed everybody, made them look like really bad teams against them. And then Navi gets there, and then they start crushing Lions also in certain games. Like they would like destroy them in 20 minutes. So it says a lot about how good Navi team was back then. I think the TI3 finals though really hurt them, and it kind of broke the team spirit that they had. And it's a pity, but I mean, obviously I don't know exactly what happened from a viewer perspective or like from a fan perspective. That was my read on what happened, between these two teams and what Navi was.
When you say that there, like, obviously that's the whole thing. These things you're listing off now, they all look like, wow, they got so lucky. Like, wow, if you were the other team, you'd be like, what the fuck, that should be in our game, this is just bullshit. But as you say, I mean, there's a great saying in sports, it's like winners make their own luck. And the logic is, you know, if you're a winner somehow, because you're always making either the correct or the really daring decision, just you're going to get more luck than someone else, because the other guy might only get that one chance for that to happen, you know, once ever, and then it doesn't happen. And he goes, it's bullshit. Now, this seems to tie into your philosophy on Dota generally, because I've noticed people think it's just OG now when you're a coach. And when people become a coach, right, they have to take on that sort of like parental figure and tell everyone, like, listen, let's look past, like, you know, minor conflict. People would get it that you're like that when you're a coach. But I went back and looked at your old interviews, and even in your old interviews and blog posts, you're always stressing, like, it's about, like, having the right people you can trust rather than just the more skilled players. It's about having people who like agree to play the same way rather than like, you know, the best player at every position. But like that seems to have been a theme your whole career. So along these lines, you also, I remember I noticed you also said when the OG move happened, when the players left and you were faced with this tough scenario, you stressed in that post that it's like results can be very fickle. Like they can come up and down no matter what team you have. But if you have kind of like this core, almost like I'd say like principles, you know, like we're all agreeing to these principles, that somehow is what leads to these amazing matches, the amazing. So can you tell me a little bit about that philosophy? And was it always the way? Did it evolve over time?
No, it was always the way. I think if you go in a game or in a competition looking at what you're like the reward you're seeking, you're probably never gonna get it. And if you do, I think you actually just got lucky. I mean, it's like, let's put it this way: like you might get it today, but your chances tomorrow to get it are as low or as high, depends how you look at it, as they were the day before. Whereas if you're willing to go through losses, if you're okay with losses, if you're really willing to take the risk, like it depends, like how far are you willing to go in order to improve. That's how I look at it, and I'm willing to go really far. I'm willing to lose like 1,000 match out of 1,000 match in order to improve. In that sense, I know that when I'm done with these 1,000 matches, the next one that I have to play, my chances to win are much higher than they were before. Whereas had I won, like some players are gonna tell you maybe what they want is if they could trade improvement for like only wins, they would be happy with it. I would not. I'd rather take the improvement part. But that's just the way you approach the game, I guess. And so often now in Dota, we're being asked, for example, yeah, I mean, of course, you play 10 hours a day when you can become a millionaire from playing the game. And I mean, it's what happened to us in TI8, right? So people are like, it seems obvious to them. But I tell myself that these, like, I know I don't look at it this way. And these guys that look at it this way, they're never going to be champions. They're never going to win anything in Dota. At least that's what I think, because I think it's not strong enough of a motivation if what you're seeking is only the price, because that price you're going to get. How many matches of Dota did I play and did I lose before I got this TI win?
For sure.
Like I would have given up much, like a long time ago. I would have given up because there's so much sacrifices, so much pain to get there. I would have given up. If what I wanted was the reward, I would have given up a long time ago. I would be doing something that is more rewarding, like on a daily basis. Yeah, you don't just get up like every day again and go through the same things and keep trying your hardest and lose again and lose again. It doesn't happen if you're not getting something that keeps you going, like every day pretty much. And what keeps me going is like improving, understanding the game better, improving becoming a better teammate, a better person, a better player. That's what's keeping going. Like at the end of the day, it's not the prices. The prices are like, it's a bonus. It's great. It feels great. It's super rewarding. And like winning TI was like for sure the best experience in my life. But yeah, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, and it's also the thing with a lot of new players, because now there's so much at stake. I mean, when we were playing like tournaments that meant as much as TI to us, because Navi was there.
For prestige, yeah.
Yeah, for prestige, exactly. We would get like some like headsets. I don't even remember, and we never got them, these headsets, you know, like, and we never asked for them. Like all we wanted was to like, all right, we beat Navi in a best of 3, guys. Like that meant the world to us, much more than whatever prize we're getting from tournaments right now. But yeah, obviously, I mean, I'm not looking down at what you get from tournaments. It's life-changing and it's amazing. But what I mean is like prestige is what we're going for, like self-confidence, or just like improvement. Yeah.
Because on this topic then, I thought this would be something interesting to talk about. Because I've also noticed over your career, some of the times where you've made what seem to be like spicy comments. First of all, some of it's just like Twitter. So for example, there was the famous one where you like sort of put RTZ down. It's really early in his career, to be honest. Like he was a bit overrated at the time because he had just burst on the scene, you know, but you put him down a little bit, along with most of the European pros I noticed. And people at the time obviously just make that like a personal thing, but it seems like it tied into this topic, because that's the thing. When you say that, like, you know, you want to keep a team together and you're willing to go through losses, that all sounds really obvious if you listen to professional sportsmen do interviews, mainly because, by the way, they don't always have the choice to just leave every month. You know, they've got a contract for 3 years and this guy who's their teammate has on for 2 years. So it's like, right, well, we've got to figure it out for the next 2 years. We can't just leave tomorrow. But TI is really the most ridiculous game breaker for the scene I've ever seen in esports. Because in CS, right, teams definitely will do roster moves if they think they're not good enough. But like the major doesn't just kill teams every year. And we only have 2 of them a year, you know, so it's not that like it can be compared to TI. It doesn't just kill every team like it does in Dota. Like what I could never believe when I watched the internationals was I'd finish watching the international and usually it'd be the team who came like 3rd place. So say it'd be like an LGD team or, you know, some really good team, and I'd be like, wow, what an exciting team, can't wait to see them at the next event. And it'd be like they have broken half the roster up, and I'd be like, what? But they weren't even that bad. Like they might have gotten there if they stayed months. But almost every team, basically except the one that wins, cracks the whole lineup or a minimum makes 1 or 2 changes. So it does seem like it's a mentality thing. And as you're saying, there's a lot of players where they really do think like the secret is, my dream career is if I lose, I change the player immediately, get the right player in, I never lose again. Like that's the dream. And to touch on it, I mean, if we want to give 2 examples, it's up to you how much you want to say on this, but the 2 examples to me are Arteezy and Samael, because they're clearly 2 of the best players probably to ever play any esports game. They're just so insanely skilled. But you look at them as players, first of all, Arteezy has just been from team to team to team to team to team, whereas if I'm that guy, obviously it's easy to say as an outsider, I would just stay put on a good team and I'd be like, let players come to me, you know, let's build a team around me, let's keep this core that's good now. But he's done the opposite. And with Samael, he is one where I brought up, because when you said about playing for money, he has that famous line, which to be fair, he's very young, and this does sound cool when you're young, is to say like, I just play for the money. But it's like, I don't actually believe him when he says that entirely, because if he played for the money, I think he just played with PPD his whole career. You know, he'd keep like the lineup away, even if he hates that guy. We're going to win the championship, you know, we'd have a chance to. Whereas if you look at his career, he's clearly made some moves that were like, he just wanted this guy as his teammate. He likes this, you know. It's like these guys, if you notice, it's not that they're doing the wrong thing necessarily. They're just all over the place with their mindset.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I don't know them personally enough to know, but the thing, like, if he's actually playing for the money, then that makes him, to me, a weak competitor. And I hope he keeps playing for the money. I mean, he's very talented, and I hope he keeps doing it, because that just makes it easier for me, right? And for the other competitors, I don't buy it, because I mean, maybe he does. The thing is, I don't know, but I think he achieved way too much in Dota, and he's proven a lot of resilience. I mean, this year he didn't get much. I mean, it was a really hard season for them. Yet he's been working really hard, and he's played amazing at this TI, like much better than he has throughout the year, and even last year, as far as I can remember. I think the performance that he had at this TI was probably the best that I've seen from him, at least in a long time. And that's with him not getting much. Like if he says that he was going for the money, then he could have been demotivated this year, and it did the opposite to him. So I think there's much more than it. Maybe it's just a facade that he's trying to put. If he does play for the money, then we're just, it's hard for me to really relate, because I think I'm like quite the opposite when it comes to what I look for in sports and competition. And I couldn't even picture myself being around people like that, because it's just very hard for me to connect on a human level.
Without talking too much just on them as specific people, because again, you haven't been teammates of theirs, so it's kind of hard to be specific, you know. As a general trend, though, is this something you see in like some of the players on paper? There might be star players, there might be some of the best Dota players, but it does seem rare, that mentality of like, we'll go through the hard times and we'll stick together, and we'll even keep a player maybe he might be the guy fucking up sometimes, you know, but we know if we can get him to this next level, then we get to benefit from it, you know. You
know, it's really funny. Like, I think, I mean, you definitely spotted that how much TI impacts the scene, right? But it's actually much more than that. And I'm going to give you an example. I think that generally, the way, like, this relation, like this link between like players and winning makes people very weak mentally. I don't blame them. I mean, I understand. It's like we sacrifice so much for this game, right? That like sometimes like your life, like everything just collapses around you because you're so committed to Dota. And I mean, it was even it's been even more true back in the days, right? That like you couldn't even support yourself like financially, but even that you were willing to sacrifice. It's like everything. Like I'm talking like social life, like studies, whatever, being in financial troubles, whatever allows me to play that game more and improve. Like people would just like go all in. It's still an all in, but of course not that it's professional. Like it's professional and it's like financially sustainable. It's less risky, but it's still a mental and a physical, like all in. You just give everything you have to give pretty much when it comes to what you can do in terms of like work and dedication, right? So it makes losing really, really rough because all you get is like this win is what keeps you going. And if you don't get it, then it's very hard. And people, they need this win to survive, not to at some point survive also like the material aspect. Not anymore, obviously, for most other players or like tier 1 and tier 2, but you need it to survive mentally because you're investing so much that if you don't get that win, it's just really hard to keep going. Like to not fall into like, I don't want to say depression or something, but it's like, it's just very rough, very, very rough. Anyway, so in order to seek that win, it makes them a little bit weaker, and then they look at like whatever they can find that helps them get closer to the win. They just go for it, right? And most of the time, the pinnacle of Dota is TI. So people look at TI and they're like, all right, these guys achieved the dream I'm also chasing. How did they do it? And then they look at it, and I don't know if it's like a conscious thing or if it's not, but then they try to mimic what just happened. And it's very funny if you look at like the history of Dota and like TIs. Look at the CDEC win, for example. After CDEC went to the second place, got to the second place of TI, everybody was like, that's crazy. These players, they're completely unknown to like most of the scene. They're not like big names. Like these are not Arteezis and Puppies, and this is just like a bunch of random guys that just got to the TI finals, and they were that close to winning TI. They also beat EG in the winner bracket or lower bracket. I don't remember. But you know what I mean? They win they beat the TI winner also like convincingly. So that means that you can just like pick up these new players, and team spirit is what matters. Like team spirit plus new players, and then most of the teams right after TI started picking up new blood and went for this like team spirit thing where like we're gonna build this play style together and stuff. We don't need star players, blah blah blah. And a lot of really big players started going to like some less known rosters. That's what CDEC did. Then you had the Liquid win. It was like this team stick together throughout the entire year. They had really bad results. So what matters is sticking together. This is what matters.
So everyone just copies the pattern of the whoever won.
Yes, no more roster changes from anybody. They don't want it because like sticking together means you're gonna get there, right? Then you had which one was it? There was the Wings one. It's like now it's like Dota knowledge, being very open with drafting, open with the way you look at the game. Like it just impacted like how all the teams approach the game because everybody's like, this is the way to go. Now with us, my guess is that people are gonna be like, this team 4, like the top 1 and top 3 teams ended up like roster shuffling 2 months or like 2 to 3 months before TI, right? So people are going to be like trying really hard the entire season is not what it is. Like what it is something else. We could try later, whatever. I think it's going to impact a lot how teams approach the season, fortunately or unfortunately, but it's always been the case in Dota. I think generally people, I don't want to call it weakness because it sounds negative. I don't mean it this way, but I don't think a weakness is necessarily a negative thing, to be honest.
Sure.
I think we all have weaknesses, and admitting what your weaknesses are is probably the best way to get over them. But yeah, it is a weakness because people need that win so bad that they're not willing to actually look at what's in front of them well enough. They're just like rushing to whatever solution is presented to them, or they think it's a solution. Most often it's not. Like very often it's not a solution. It's just debate, but yeah.
Well, along these lines, like you say, when the CDEC result happened, that was where right afterwards, I mean, obviously people like Eternal Envy were notable for this. They literally went and they were like, right, let's get all the 7K, MMR, super mechanical players. Like, we'll just show them how to play the game because, you know, that obviously works, you know. This aggressive guy looked really good. But then the problem is, when I'm talking about like a little bit disparagingly about some of these like superstar roster shuffles, where I kind of feel like I know why to them they wanted those players because they were like, that guy's amazing as well, he's amazing, like get all these guys on my team and I'll win. is that if you look at it, I mean, you said in an AMA once that to you a good support equals good game understanding. And if you notice, if you actually go and look at TI, the tournament all these young superstars want to win, and you look at the teams that consistently go the deepest, it's all the legendary captains. It is all the support players. Whereas actually, they were right in a sense. You can swap out some of the carries and you can have a guy you've got it on your team where they're a no-name and they win. But you're not going to do that with like a 4 and 5 position who've never played and they just started the game. So you have to still be very careful about how you build up like the core of the team, not using the Dota term there, obviously, but the body of the team, as it were, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's extremely important because, I mean, experience I think is extremely valuable. It's probably, I actually don't want to rank it, but I was going to say the most valuable. The truth is I don't like the ranking, but there's no success without experience. I don't believe in it. And if, back to what I was saying earlier, if there is, I think it's just like a one-time thing.
Yes, fleeting.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't like reliably repeat success without experience. At least from the experience that I got, this is not the conclusion I got to. I got to the opposite one where like experience, you need experience to repeat success and to like somehow control it, if you could control it. Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, we skip back in time again. So for TI3, you got to play in as much as you were part of the first wild card match where it was like there's another chance to get in, and you played against a team Rattlesnake, which had some players from China people would know, Lan M, Luo, these are known players, you know. And you didn't win the match, and you didn't get into TI. And even though, okay, I know every team that loses a big match has that like sob story of like, oh, if I just did this one thing wrong, or oh, I just made a mistake. But usually they're just like focusing on the one bad thing, you know. Usually if you look, it's like they did 10 things wrong in the game before, and then they shouldn't have, you know. It's like that really doesn't usually work as an excuse. But when I looked into this particular match, there is a misclick play by your boy Shocks here. That is a nightmare play if you watch it, because like he does have he could have landed a stun on 3 heroes and he fucks it up and lands it on the wrong one. And like that didn't cost a whole game. It was a best of 5, but that's a pretty brutal one. Like that's a hard one to come back from. Right? So was it rough not making this TI?
I mean, it was really rough not making this TI, but I mean, it's exactly what you said earlier. It's like there were so many mistakes that you can't blame it on anything, even though there was that really unfortunate that became a very like classic and funny moment in Dota. This board stunning. All the Dota, like the earlier Dota fans, they know about this, and every time they hear about Socks, they mention it and they bring it back.
It's
and
unfortunate, yeah.
Yes, it's very unfortunate. I also buy back. I was playing Dice here. I buy back for that team fight, and I get this vacuum on these heroes. They're clumped up, and the board just dies. But I mean, the board died really good. Like we got that board real good. So at least we got that one. He also could have run away. Yeah, but we got it. No, but I mean, it was rough. I think we learned that a lot for that wild card. We definitely could have won. I mean, like level-wise, we were good enough to make it to the tournament and also have a decent result in the tournament. Like I still strongly believe it. We really failed ourselves when it comes to drafting. I think at that point, we just got caught by the pressure once again as a team. It was mainly our captain back then, Goblak, I think, that had to do a lot of reflection on what happened drafting-wise. We did a lot of role switching in the series, things you never see anymore. But back then, the way teams dealt with pressure was so bad that I ended up, for example, like this would sound completely insane today, right? But like that one player plays mid, the second game he's support, and the next game he's offlane. That's okay. That's how bad it got. So it was just really rough, right? That doesn't set you up for success. If anything, it's quite the opposite. So.
Okay, so after this is one of the teams people definitely know you for, which was the Sigma International team, where you actually had obviously a lot of good results, and this was kind of like your last big period where you were in a top team, right? In this team, I noticed as a trend, was this the first team where you were like taking over everything in terms of being the captain, etc.? Yes,
it was.
Okay, and why was that the case? Like, has it come to that point in your career? Was there just not someone available? How did it happen?
It was mainly because of what had been mentioned earlier. It's like the drafting thing that happened for the TI3 with Quantic. I realized that even though Goblak had been a great captain, that very day he did not show up as a captain. I mean, I don't blame him. I had also went through a lot of failures myself. That's not me blaming at all, but it's just like as like looking objectively at the situation, and I realized that there was nothing I could have done that day that could have changed anything. So I was kind of destined to lose that wildcard match and not get in the tournament, even though we had a pretty decent year and we worked really hard. So I then decided that, all right, I'm gonna take more control, because I just felt like I could do it, and that I promised myself that if that day happens again, I will not fail anybody, and I will not fail myself, and I'll just be strong enough to go through it and get my teammates and myself where we deserve to be. So then I just decided to take much more control, when it came to Sigma.
Okay, so since one of the things that I found interesting about your career is that you have played with so many players from all around the world in the scenes, and some of them were great players before, some of them later went on to be great players. There's a couple of players I want to ask about in the Sigma lineup. So one of them is FATA, who everyone's going to know, for example, when he was Team Liquid. This is a person who's been around a bunch of top teams, but sometimes he hasn't been on the team that when they had the biggest results, and so he's maybe missed out on some of the championship. Who is this player? And what was he like when he played with you?
So when FATA joined, he was a extremely talented player. I think he lacked a lot of experience when he joined us, but he was just mechanically and his game understanding mainly. You have a lot of super sick mechanical players, but that guy, it was the mechanical part and the game understanding. He was just a great player, one of the best, honestly. Just amazing player. He did have certain flaws, how he looked at the game, and he learned a lot in Sigma. Now I'm speaking for him, but at least from me looking at him as a captain, sure. I think he grew a lot when it came to mostly team aspects of the game. He, of course, the team also learned a lot from him. These things go it's in the two directions. It's never it's always a win-win. But yeah, he was just mechanically and strategically extremely smart. I think it still is. I haven't played with him in a long time, but he pretty much earned my eternal respect in that team.
When you're the captain, you're the guy. Obviously, this is your first foray into it. You've done it a lot since, and later, obviously, you were a coach. So these are all roles where you can actually have input in what your teammates do. What is your general philosophy in that sense? Because I notice coaches in sports as well can go across the entire spectrum. You can have the coach who's he thinks he knows exactly sort of the science of how to play, the ABCs, and he wants this player to do exactly this thing, and the other guy's going to do something else. It's the whole thing's a clockwork scenario. It's all building into each other. Meanwhile, you have coaches where some of them, they just think it's you just coach the emotional side of people. If you get this guy to feel like he's doing well, he's comfortable, he's going to play his best. Some people, they want people to figure out on their own. They make them go the hard route, so you've got to learn these things yourself. Now, there's obviously no right answer for whatever the player is, but if you're dealing with a player like FATA, if you bring on these players, what was your philosophy? What do you think of that?
Back in the days, my philosophy was different from the one that I have now, I think. Not much different, but there were certain things I was doing wrong that I learned from my mistakes, and nowadays I'd like to think I don't do them anymore. Back in the days, I knew that my ideas, the way my game understanding was just better than most other players. I just knew it. I had that gut feeling, at least, that kept me going. So the problem was that when I felt like the game didn't go the way it should, or the way I looked at it, I had a really hard time letting go, which is a very something you need to have as a captain. You need to know how to let go and how to just adapt to whatever the game offers, whether it is a teammate's mistake, a teammate that just looks at the game completely differently. Even though you're in charge, you're the captain, if that guy is not going to go with what you're trying to build, then you have to adapt, because if you force it, you're not going to have 5 people working together. If you're in a position where you can adapt and help the team adapt to that guy, that might be the better move. Even if, of course, on paper it's not. It's for sure the worst move, but in the moment, it's definitely the better move. And back in the days, I don't think I had the maturity or experience to understand these things. So I was kind of banging my head against the wall, trying to fix something that was not fixable in the game. Nowadays, I've definitely learned that. Knowing how to let go is something you need when you approach these games and big competitions. Even it's hard. It's very hard, because it's kind of accepting that you're gonna have less control right now, and sometimes when you know you're right, you still have to let go. And going back to what I said earlier about how badly you want to win, how badly you need that win.
Yes,
it makes it very hard.
I mean, obviously, like you touched on there, the problem is if you are, especially if you're the captain or the coach, the feeling is, since I want to win so much, let's just correct all these mistakes now. Like, let's tell someone everything they did wrong. But that well, except for very rare individuals, that probably does more harm than good sometimes, even if you're right.
It does. Sometimes it does. And you have to adapt to the person. And that comes even after. You also sometimes have to deal with the situation in the game. Where like in the game, it's just not going to happen. We're talking like some seconds. So did you move on like quickly enough to look at what comes next? Or are you stuck on what just happened? Or like the fact that the strategy is not played correctly? Or like people did not understand what you were trying to build with the draft or with the strategy? If you're stuck, the chances to win the game are probably gone, and there's something you probably could have done to protect them, which was to adapt yourself, even though you know that in that specific moment you were right. But it doesn't matter. It's not about whether you were right or not, whether the team is doing the right thing. As I mean, I've said it often also, like in interviews also, like it's better to have the team like do the wrong thing together than like a couple of people doing like different moves that are all very good in their own like aspects.
It's a famous saying, actually. I actually heard it from League of Legends because it's another team game, which is like it's better to have 5 people do the wrong thing together than 5 people try and do the right thing separately.
Yeah, definitely. That's something we've learned in Dota pretty early, but we went through losses and then realized that this is the way to go. And when I said about rewriting the book of sports, like I'm pretty sure that this thing is super well known, and you probably get in in a good sports team, and you hear this on the second day or maybe the very first day. Sure. But this took us, I don't know, a year, 2 years in Dota to figure it out.
Well, we had no coaches back then, right? It was just people playing the game.
Yes, exactly. But that lesson, like after you go through a lot of losses, that thing is just it's set in stone. Like it's never gonna go away. Like you just know it and you never forget it. That's a good part, at least. Whereas like if you just got told, maybe you still need to hit the wall a couple of times before you actually understand that guy that day said something very smart that I should have listened to a little bit more carefully. But yeah.
So the other player I just wanted to touch on briefly was the player miGGel, the Danish player who was obviously a Dota 1 player as well. So who was this guy?
Oh, that guy was a Dota 1 legend, actually, like one of the best players in the whole Dota 1 thing era. miGGel, he was just a very good player, a veteran back then already. I mean, when he was on Sigma, I think he was already 26 or 27. So he taught us a lot about, he shared a lot of experience with us, a lot of positivity also. He was just a genuinely funny and almost all the time, like super happy, smiling all the time, making jokes. He was a very cool guy to have around. He helped us handle losses also much better than we did by ourselves. And he was just also a very, very good player. So he just taught us about the game a lot. Like, heroes, how to approach team fights or whatever it was. He just shared a lot of experience with us. So it was great having him around. He retired after that. I think he was already thinking about retiring during the Sigma thing. He probably knew it was going to be his last team. So it's a pity, but I mean, once again, personal choice.
Okay, so when you were in this team, you were one of the team. This is one of those ones where people know like one side of a story of a tournament. So everyone knows the story of the Speed Gaming team getting Arteezy and then doing that miracle run out where they came out the group stage and like last place, and then they made it all the way to the final and won and beat even people like Team DK, who then went on to be like the best team in the world. And it's like that side of the story you know, but people forget your team was one of the ones that they beat along the way. So what was it like on your side of the equation there? Like even though that team themselves have all these like great anecdotes of like, we didn't know what the fuck we were doing and we're just like picking this hero here and trying stuff out, what's it actually like to play against that?
They are a very strong team. That tournament was probably our best tournament. I think we showed up really strong. We had a really, really dominant group stage where we beat everybody, I think, except for Alliance or maybe another team we lost to. But I mean,
Alliance and DK were the two you lost to. You beat RV and you beat the Speed Gaming, and yeah.
I also remember the series. People obviously always remember the winners, which is fair enough. But the 2 games, we actually were like crushing them in the 2 games, if I remember correctly. I think we're like some 10 or 15k ahead in both games. We had the game, but they just they played better overall. I think we did like some crucial mistakes that they did not do, and we gave them abilities to come back in both games, which they did. And once they got like a lead on us, they did not do these mistakes, and then just closed both games. It was a very rough series to swallow for us because we felt like I don't want to say that we felt like we were the better team, because it's not something you can say once you lost, but we definitely felt like they were not that much better than us. And we got off to 2 really, really solid starts where like in any other day we probably would have won these games, but that very specific day we didn't manage to, and they took them. I think we were, I don't want to say bitter, because that means that we didn't think they deserved to win. They definitely did, but we were disappointed with ourselves. Very disappointed. It was also, I don't remember, it was a single limb, because I don't recall playing a loser bracket game. Yeah.
Just a single.
Yeah, so it's just rough. Like single limb, you lose twice when, I don't want to say throw because I hate that term in Dota, but it's kind of what people would call it. It's like 2 throws. But yeah, I mean, they went on to win the tournament. So they definitely were the better team that day and the day after, or whatever, whenever was the finals. Rough series.
Because as I alluded to there, that's one of those wins where it's not even like they put on a false front and say like, yeah, we knew we were going to win and we were doing all the clever things we'd figured out. They even acknowledged themselves, they just kind of tried some crazy shit that was going badly. And what I wanted to ask you was this. So that is actually something which is a famous hallmark of Eternal Envy's career, actually, where people always joke that, it's like when the win rate drops to like 10% chances when he has the best chance to win, because he just sort of says, fuck it, and just does whatever. And he's won a lot of those games ridiculously. So this is something where it ties in again in the present to the OG win, because a lot of these scenarios, I mean, there was a great no-tail quote that went like this. Well, I'll edit it so it doesn't have the certain word in that you probably not allowed to say now. The quote is like, when the game goes fully fucked up, then you don't want to sort of go half fucked up and do the right thing, because then like you're sort of stuck between the two. You have to go fully fucked up as well. And it's a weird mentality, but I've noticed Dota's one of the only games I've ever seen that's like this, actually. In something like League of Legends, it's a bit more streamlined as to how it's going to go and who's going to win. And if you come back, it's not going to be by doing something against the meta often. And in Counter-Strike, likewise, you're both trying to do similar things, What is it about Dota in this sense? Because it seems like this is a unique aspect that it ties into mentality again, because you have to not let yourself get out of the game. But why is it that sometimes you can kind of tune into a frequency almost of playing Dota where it's like you do things that are counterintuitive and they win you the game?
You actually, I think you understand that for top teams, when you struggle against teams that are supposedly weaker, it's like you're going to have these games between like the best teams in the world, and it's going to feel much easier to play than some qualifying games that you play against a bunch of unknown players that are, of course, they're pretty good, but I mean, as a team, they're like very far from what you bring to the table as a team, like as a tier 1 team. And then you start realizing that the things that they do it's a little bit crazy, and you trying to predict what they're going to be doing and trying to read it. It just makes you play worse, and you just don't match what they're bringing to the game. Whereas, and this is when, if you actually go also full crazy and you just start playing the game and start matching whatever they're doing and just answering it without thinking about how am I going to outsmart them, how am I going to like predict what they're going to be doing next and stuff. You just like stop overthinking and you just go ham also. And then the game becomes much easier, and it's like, whoa, like that was much easier than what it was before. And it happens in some of the qualifying games where like game 1 is super hard, and then you realize we're just looking at it wrong. Obviously against like better teams, you can't let them structure what they want to do, because if you do, they're just gonna win, because what they do is really good and they have practiced it and they're the best at doing what they do, obviously, by definition. So you don't want to let them play in that comfort zone. You want to push them away. You want to break their structure and force them to apply yours or not, or counter it. It doesn't matter what you're doing, but like it's a very different approach to the game. And sometimes it does happen that even top teams or top players, they force you into this like chaos, And you do have to. I do believe also, I agree with what Johan said, that you have to go with it. You have to adapt.
So this Sigma team had this, like, let's say 4 or 5 months where things looked really good. You were always like, you were on the cusp of becoming champions. You know, you'd make the semis. You could beat almost, except for maybe Alliance, who was like the clear-cut best. You could beat pretty much every team, depending on the day, but you never quite broke through. Like, since it was your first team being like the full captain, but it was also, until now with OG, sort of the highest you'd gone in Dota, because the teams after that, you know, were like different projects and things went downhill. Was this how do you look back on that period? Like, does it painful because you didn't quite break through? Can you find the positives of it?
I mean, I have a lot of regrets on that period. I think me and Sox, it's mostly our bad in the sense that, I mean, we weren't committed 100% to the game at that point.
This is before you went full time, right?
Exactly. Back at that point, I was studying. I was studying in a business school, and I was finishing my studies, and I didn't want to drop. I was also like trying to protect my social life a little bit more, try to spend time with my friends, with my family as much as I could. I was trying to do everything at the same time. I was also trying to look at the business side of things a little bit more, try to take more responsibilities when it comes to sponsoring and stuff, because the way it was dealt with before was just really bad, and I just wanted players to have better conditions. So I was like, since I have a little bit of business like background, I can maybe help. I was just all over the place, and the consequence of that is that the Dota part, it was not as good as what it should have been or could have been on my side. It was pretty much the same situation for Sox, where we were both like, we don't want to commit fully. We're just like try very hard for the big tournaments, and that's it. And the other members on the team back then, they were all in. So that already created a little bit of a difference. We were very confident in our ability to be on top of these tournaments when it mattered, and just resting or like being a little more laid back when like in between tournaments with Sox. And there was just like a fundamental disagreement within the team that was never really spoken. People didn't really express these things. It just happened that FATA and Pass, the German support player, they both left couple days before a big Chinese tournament. I don't remember which tournament it was, and like before TI, like it was like we're talking maybe June. It was like June, so pretty close to TI at that point. So it was the first time that I got to face that situation where like two players just leave. I had definitely my like how to put it, like responsibilities in that departure, because we weren't committed as much as they were, which ended up making them unhappy. Obviously, the way they left was not good and not nice. Looking back at it, I don't understand why they left, even though I think our team had a lot of potential, and they probably regretted it after we did and they did. I mean, I know for a fact they did because we had talks about it later. But it was an understandable move that they made, and it kind of killed that team. Obviously, it also killed my motivation for a certain amount of time, because I was trying to give so much to that team, in the sense that I wanted to help with the business side of things and with the Dota part. I was already drained from trying to be all over the place, and that happening, it was just too hard for me to take. So I needed a break at that point. And this is when I did my first casting for the next TI, because I was just on a break. I got contacted to like be an analyst. I was like, sure, that sounds fun. Let's go for it. I didn't want to be back on the grind right away back then. I was trying to recover from what has happened pre-summer. It was a rough experience, but I learned that when you want to, like, you have to commit. There's no other way. So definitely a great lesson that I got from that experience. And then I went all in right away after. Well, like, and everything I did after in Dota was like 150% commitment.
Okay. I saw you say in an old AMA about the Sigma team that you thought the biggest weaknesses the team had was late game decision making and experience level. Now, obviously, again, alluding to the present, OG pretty much won the international off late game decision making and knowing what to do in like tough situations where there's only like one or two possible correct answers, right? What did you have to learn from this team to then? Like, did you already have the basics but you couldn't apply it? Was the evolution that had to take place? Did actually coming out of the game help you figure some of these things out?
I think actually no, we did. I actually think we really lacked late game decision making, because we hadn't been in that many like high pressure, super late game scenarios against top teams, like in tournaments. Like if you compare it to like some Navi or Alliance, I mean, these guys had much more experience than we did. So when we got to that point in the games, we felt like we were kind of experimenting and we were learning like in the moment, which is pretty tricky because obviously you realize you did a mistake. The game is, that's it. The game is done. It's over. You lost and you have to wait for the next tournament for it to happen. And we did not get that much experience. We're talking like 6 months, maybe. I don't even remember how long it was, but we definitely lacked it. It came later. For that, you need to go through these games. Whether you win or lose them, you learn. It's just experience. You can't just like create experience. It creates itself.
Okay, because then, as you said, you did go full time, but this is where you tried to make this all French lineup, and the results were obviously incredibly like mediocre, like nothing to speak about in this interview. But since it wasn't until the next year when you got this move seeming out of the blue to join Alliance, was that period where you were in the French team and where you were trying to make this project, when you were trying to go full time? If you really went all in at that point in time, where arguably you had your worst results of your career, did that not ever make you second guess it and think like, nah, maybe I should just quit? Like maybe it's not going to happen for me. Or obviously at this point in time, France wasn't exactly a Dota power, so maybe there's going to be no way back into these top teams. You know, there's a lot of politics as to whether you can get into a team. Did you ever question yourself? Were you going to stick with it no matter what?
So at that point, my confidence in myself, like as a player, as a captain, everything, it was still like, it was never, it never changed. It was still like through the roof. So I just kept going. I also felt like I could just build a French roster and take them to the highest level. That's how confident I was. It obviously did not work for, I mean, several reasons. But I do remember that once the Alliance thing started is when my confidence, I started questioning myself as a player. I was like, it's been a while now. It's already been like 5 years or something of competing, and I'm very far from, because I felt like my ideas, they were good enough to win these TIs even, and yet I'm sitting there not even making it to the main event ever. Yeah. If I can't, like, not even making it to the tournament, I'm sitting there not being able to win some random online tournament. So I'm like, you know, you want to be confident, you want to believe, you want to chase your dream, but you don't want to be delusional. So it does happen these times where you're like, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. And that was definitely that period for me, and it was a very dark period because it's just hard, you know. It's like, had I been wrong this entire time? And it also makes you question. It's much more than the Dota part. It's like, am I looking at myself wrong? You know, like it's right. This is like, it's much more than Dota. It's life. So I remember that I was going through some really rough moments, trying to convince myself, and then I was like, I'll just let the game talk. I'll just like play more, see where that gets me. But there was so much stuff to deal with, where it's like financial issues because you hadn't been successful in a very long time. A lot of things that just like added to each other's made that period very hard, until the point where, so it was the Alliance thing, and then it was Monkey Freedom Fighters or whatever. It got to the point where I was like, I need a break from this this playing thing. It's not really working. I mean, I still really like the game. I think my ideas are good enough, but obviously I wasn't sure anymore if it was because of like bad sequence of events or because of myself. Like I was kind of in the dark when it came to this. So I was like, I'll just take a break from it and see where that gets me. And if it's like away from Dota, then it is. If it's not, then it's not. We'll see. And this is, at that point, I just decided to stay away from Dota a little bit, as at least the competitive part. And I think it's around that time that Fly contacted me the first time. Like Fly and No-Tail, they contacted me about OG. Were they called OG? I think they were already called OG. Yes. To potentially coach them. So that's how things happen. And when they contacted me the first time, I had already made my mind. So I was like, my first answer was like, no, I mean, I appreciate it, but, and they had known me as a player because of the Sigma days, right? We played against Fnatic so many times. I don't think we dropped a single series for them. They had a lot of respect for us as a team, and probably a lot of respect for me as a captain. Had drafted against them many times. So at first I was like, this is not something I'm willing to do. And then I've been like watching a lot of their replays, and I just really liked the way they played, like the way they were drafting, the way they were playing. I felt like that was a very smart team, and I could see a lot of ways to like help them improve pretty much, or whatever they had going, make it much better. At least that's the read I had on it. So I was like, you know what, this is my chance. This is a team that had won a major, the Frankfurt major. So the thing, like this thing of saying that, oh, it's just because the team that I'm in is just not good enough to apply these ideas. Yes. That was out of the picture, right? Because they had won a Valve event before, so they were obviously good enough. So it was mainly me. If it worked, then it meant that I was right the entire time, and if it didn't, then it meant that I was indeed overrating myself, like way more. And then the exit, you know, like the door is just there. I just exit the room. That's it. So I was like, you know what, this is probably a very good final test. So I'll just take it. And this is when I decided to go and coach them and see what happens. Yeah, that's pretty much how it started. At least it's the way I approached it on a personal level.
Right, here is what would be termed a tough question. So when you were in this period before you'd become the coach of OG, and before you'd, again, been able to properly prove yourself, like you know what you're talking about, and then obviously now being able to play later on, at this point in time, you know, there's been some good results, there's been some highs, there's been some times you were close, but you weren't always on the best teams, you didn't always have the best teammates, you know. Like I was saying, at that point in time, aside from the Alliance experiment, which to be fair is when they were kind of desperate, you know, they'd tried a million different things, and so that was just them, again, trying something different to make it work one last time with the core. People from outside did think you were a bit of a spicy guy. Thought some of your tweets were a bit wild. You were very dismissive of certain players or teams or whatever. Were you ever an arrogant guy?
I don't think so. I really don't think so. I just spoke my mind pretty much. And most of these tweets, for example, the Artusi tweet, like when I said it was overrated, I didn't mean it. It's also, I mean, probably the way I was expressing myself was just bad. It's also that English had never been my native language, and my English improved over the years, but back then it was just pretty bad. What I actually meant by them is that at that time is that people were too hasty on calling him the best mid laner in the world, because like that tournament was his first LAN event with pro players. So I was like calling him like the same as these like dandies or whatever that had been in 3 TI finals, that has had so much experience, like went through so much at the highest and stayed on that top level. Because, you know, like achieving top level is something, stabilizing top level is a whole new problem that you have to solve. And these players, they've done it in the past anyway. So I was like, comparing him to these players is too early. Like obviously that guy, and I thought that guy was really talented, obviously, and very good at Dota, but people were too hasty to call him like the best mid laner ever. He's not the best mid laner ever, and he's not going to be the best mid laner ever in a while. He might become the best mid laner ever, but we're not there yet. That's pretty much what I meant. So I was like, we're overrating him. Right. And people probably looked at that statement as me calling him a bad player or a worse player than it was. And it's probably what it meant, obviously, but just bad word usage or whatever it was. But anyway, back to the question. I mean, I don't think I've ever been arrogant. It's just like I spoke my mind. I've been confident in certain things, and sometimes I look at something and I don't think it's good, and I express it. Maybe expressing it is not the way to go, which is a little bit sad in hindsight, because I think everybody, it's like I never also looked the problem is I also never I don't know if it's a problem, but I never looked at myself as or like at my opinion as being more valuable than anybody else's.
Right.
So when someone speaks his mind, when a fan speaks his mind about a team and say, I don't think that team is very good right now, it's like I might also say it. Obviously, I was in the position where like if I say it, it's gonna upset a lot more than just some random dude saying it. And obviously, that's me not being responsible enough with the weight that I get from just being publicly exposed. Yeah, I mean, all in all, that's kind of what made it. But to be very honest, I don't think I've ever been arrogant. I'm a very respectful person when it comes to people that are around me, even competitors. I would never disrespect anybody or disrespect the amount of work that is behind, because I mean, I go through the same, and I know how much it means to all these competitors, and I know the unbelievable amount of work. So if anything, to me, it's only respect and admiration, and it's also passion. And sometimes I'm a very passionate person, so I'm going to express my thoughts in a very maybe sometimes too how to put it, too colorful way.
Sure.
Whereas if I had more time to think about it, I would have tried to make it more like politically correct. But that's just not the person that I am. And being a fake person is not something I don't want to just put an image. I want to be myself, and people like it or don't. And I'm not here to have people like me or not. Like I'm just here to be myself, and people are also going to be themselves. And I'm sure everybody's going to get along in the end. That's kind of the look, like the view that I have on it, whether it's good or bad, but it's just it's just mine.
Okay. Because from the outside, I could see both sides of this. Like when I've seen interviews with you often were like explaining the context, and you weren't so hasty. But then on other times, if people didn't see that, and then they hear, for example, some of the things you said in this interview, if this was an interview and it ended at this point in 2015, the rest didn't happen, everyone would be saying you're arrogant, because they'd be like, "What? This guy thinks he knew better than other people. He knew Dota." But that's actually something I've noticed is really tricky. Is that the problem is, I understand if you're a fan. If you hear someone say, like, I think I had a very good knowledge of the game or knew how to win and, like, I had the tools but didn't have the right team, they're going to think, like, well, that's just an excuse, You did, like, everyone who's a loser just says that and everyone thinks it. But actually, I know from other games, I've known some people who were, like, captains, but they weren't at the top level, but they were, like, the veteran guy who's, like, brought up a million talents and worked with all different teams. And some of these guys, I go to those guys when I want to know about things in the game and I ask them. And when they're telling me, like, what they think of a certain, like, star player or some team that just rose up, I tell them, like, dude, I would pay to listen to this. You're better than all the analysts out there that we're doing it at the moment. It's just that, unfortunately, no one will ever know, because unless you have the accomplishment, it's like people don't actually listen until they see the trophy. If you've got the trophy, you go the other way and they go, right, well, whatever you say must be right then, sir. You won the tournament. But if you don't have the trophies yet, you don't get that credit, right?
I mean, that's so true. And I'm going through it right now, right? Like, every decision that
now you've got to be careful what you say now, because everything you say now is gospel, right?
It's like, yeah, exactly. And that's not right. That's not right at all. The same way, everything that I thought before was not crap because I was not winning these tournaments. It was not right. And it's not right now too. Like, I am going to make some mistakes. I'm going to, like, slip here and there. And people are probably going to find excuses for me. Like, oh, he didn't really slip. I mean, he won TI. That guy doesn't slip. I do. Everybody does. And when you're aware of it, it's probably the best way to get you to win TI and win another TI. But I mean, what you said is extremely true. And for example, me saying that I thought my ideas were good enough to win these tournaments, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I hope it's the case for most of the players. I mean, for me, it was, and it's the reason why I wanted to get to that tournament that badly, and it's the reason why I was willing to sacrifice everything in order to get there. Because if I thought I was not good enough, then what's the point of all this? I mean, I'm in this not for the journey. I'm in this to win these tournaments. Like, I want to prove that I'm the best. This is my goal. And if I don't believe that I can do it, then I'm out. I'm going to do something else. Like, I'm going to do something. I mean, whatever it is. But you know what I mean? Like, this is what keeps me going. This is what makes me like get up every morning, because I believe that I can do it. It's the reason why I keep working and I keep trying to get where I wanted to, and I ended up doing it. So there was probably some truth to it back then. And if I had to like talk with my old self, I would tell myself, just keep going. Like, don't give up. Do not give up. You think the ideas are good, but it's also like, of course, you don't want to be like cocky about it, because being cocky means you don't self-reflect and you don't question yourself. And I was questioning myself at the time. And I mean, I've been mentioning it, the reason why I thought about quitting almost, because I'm like, maybe at the end of the day, I mean, it's been years and years and I don't get there. So I might have been wrong the entire time. So I was also considering that part very, very, very seriously. But I do think that you need, like, it's confidence. I don't think it's arrogance. Arrogance is like, I don't even know what it is, because it would be blindly, like, never putting yourself in question. It's like, yes, I keep losing, but I lose because of everybody else and not because of me. But that was not the approach that I had. It's like, some things are good enough, some aren't. And I kept trying to work and kept trying to improve until the point where I started doubting myself. And now I was like losing confidence in myself as a player and as a leader. That's another problem, because that's a reason that is good enough to stop, or at least that's what I thought back then. So that's what almost got me to quit.
When you came into this Alliance team, obviously, as we touched on earlier in the interview, this is another team that had played a part in your career, and you'd battled against them, and they'd often beaten you. And as you mentioned when you were talking about Alliance and Navi, you had a lot of respect for them. But specifically, you pointed out as a theme, you respected the way they understood the game in terms of drafting and what to do with the different heroes. So if you came into this team and you were the drafter, now I did notice you stressed in interviews, you weren't like the captain outright, you didn't tell everyone what to do, but you were in charge of drafting. And this was a team with 3 of the players that won those TIs. Admittedly, S4 had left, so it's not quite the same powerhouse, but you were just replacing EGM basically. I've noticed in this team, you had some decent results early, then everything went to shit basically, and obviously there was no TI. Now, I saw in some interviews in the past, you said you never could find the playing style of the team. Now, the team in general obviously was lost before you got there. They'd already had the bad months, and this is why S4 left, went to the secret team. Was this a project? Could it have never worked? Do you look back now and you couldn't figure it out? What did you try to do with Alliance?
I mean,
on one level, if you were there playing against them, part of you still thinks, well, I've still got Loda and I've still got, Aki, you've still got these legendary players. So if you're someone who's the guy in charge of some of it, you want to make the best use of them.
I mean, when I joined, I realized that the amount of leadership that S4 was doing for them, because it definitely felt like the team lacked the direction. But that was a good thing because I was willing to give the team the direction, and I think that I did when I joined. We had a lot of good results. I think we had over 80% win rate. We were winning pretty much every game that we played. The team went from having really poor results to just making it to every single tournament again and just dominating the scene for at least the European scene for quite some time. What ended up happening, the team had some trust issues. I would say not trust, but as far as I can remember, there was a meta, and we started building a certain structure for ourselves that worked really well. There was some patch changes. It was the troll sniper patch, and we had strategies. We made these heroes look completely broken. Everybody picked them up and stuff, and then they got nerfed. And then we went back to from being very humble, all of us, and building something together, trusting each other's, listening to each other's, and just helping each other's get where we wanted to get as a team. When we had to start over, because that's what the patch did to us, we started over from a little bit not as a position that was not as humble as the one that we were when I took the team. So people were less willing. I mean, I know it sounds like it sounds weird because this is a team that didn't get where it's supposed to be getting, but people were less willing to listen. People were less willing to work together. But it just happened. It was not a conscious thing. These are consequences of success, where people start overstepping and just outside of what their role is supposed to be in the team. At least it's the feeling I got there. And it made the atmosphere and everything in the team just much worse than what it was before. And it made my role much harder also, is what I felt. It just became really hard to give that team a direction because I didn't feel like I had the control I needed to make it happen. And I remember us having talks and me specifically saying that, when the first sequence of what we had going was very good, and it was, in my opinion, because of this and this and this, and I would want us to try to replicate this and to keep building and to go through that rough sequence of events together. It just didn't end up happening until the point where the team atmosphere became too. It wasn't that bad, to be honest, but it's just it was hard to get that team anywhere until at a certain point it felt like we were just banging ourselves against our heads against the wall. And when you hit that point, considering the personal confidence issues I was going through, it was just too much to handle. So when people started thinking about giving up, I did not. I kind of went with the flow. It's pretty much what happened. I was like, oh, whatever. Let's just move on.
From the outside, Loda seems like someone with a very strong personality. I mean, obviously with good reason. The guy actually was a top player for 10 years. Every game he switched to, pretty much, he was getting to the top again. So it's understandable. Obviously, this team was at one point in time the best in the world. If you play with him, and you're someone who's trying to help figure out the style of the team. How do you think you best use Loda? Like, what do you do? Do you just let him do what he wants? Do you give him some direction? Does he want to be told what hero to play, etc.?
To be honest, it was not a player thing. Just think about the team, just like the team, including me, like the five of us making it hard to work together after a certain point. It was not specifically Loda, it was just all of us. But just going back to the Loda question, I never felt, I mean, he's obviously like very confident in himself, and he has a very strong personality, that's for sure, and that's an asset in many cases. In some others, it can sometimes make it a little bit harder to tackle certain things. I never felt like it was a problem or anything like it. To be honest, I think if anything, maybe I felt like he didn't adapt as fast, or like sometimes he could have been more open-minded to certain things. That's like, if I had to blame like one aspect, it would be that one, but that's a very minor thing. Like, it just doesn't happen. It didn't happen fast enough sometimes, but I'm pretty sure I was doing certain things wrong, and like all of us, we were. Nobody's perfect, and that includes him. That includes me. That includes everybody. I never felt like it was hard to work with. If anything, his experience was very valuable, and he's a very calm and collected person, actually, which actually makes him very easy to work with. You could always have a talk with him about pretty much everything, which is a really cool thing to have.
I saw that in the early days, you guys actually were one of the teams that beat the secret team, which had S4 on, which was the same exact lineup that, you know, very shortly after, I think maybe like a month later, which is winning everything and went into TI as the favourites. The one where you look back now even at that lineup and you go, God damn, how did they get all those players on paper? But obviously they had their peak that was amazing, and then they dropped off and the team broke up, because that's basically the very vision of making the team was, we're going to leave teams and form them and try and make a super team. So you guys actually beat them. What were they like as a team, and why do you think they never fully got that big win they wanted?
I actually remember drafting against them, and I felt like their drafts were pretty weak in that tournament. I think they had a lot of different ideas going into the games. At least that's my, like, I read them through Dota, so I don't really know what happened exactly, but from the Dota part, like from the drafting part, that's how I felt. I felt like they didn't have a clear they had some captaining issues. That's like my Dota read, where like they didn't really know what they were doing, to be honest. I think they were just like in a spot where, yeah, they weren't sure what direction to take, who to listen to, or who to not listen to. I don't really know. That's my read. It would be interesting to hear it from them, but I would be really surprised if they said it was the opposite. It really definitely felt like that was the case. So I don't think they were at their best, and we were at ours, which made it a very, I don't want to say easy series, but it was definitely not a hard series for us to play. We felt like we were like much better than them that tournament. It was pretty straightforward 2-0 as far as I can remember. Other teams were much stronger opponents for us. I think they were just in a bad spot, and I think after that tournament, they started doing really well. So that probably means that they were hitting like the lowest point during that tournament was Star Ladder, and then they probably had some talks or like some strategical changes that got them to play much better, and they went on to dominate the scene right after. So yeah, I think that's what happened.
Right, just to finish up the Alliance topic, this is just a shot in the dark on this one. I could be totally wrong in this one, if so, just let me know. But one of the things I noticed about the results as they started to go downhill in Alliance was that you had a few notable losses to the Ninjas in Pyjamas team, which, if everyone remembers, was like Era, he was the famous player, and then a bunch of other Swedish players. And here's one thing I have learned in esports, which is that if you meet Swedish people initially, they seem like the most chilled out people in the world. Like they don't seem to get bothered in the same way. They're not getting super emotional and raging out and smashing walls and stuff. But tell you what, they don't fucking like losing to other Swedish people. That triggers the fucker. So here's the thing, right? Alliance wasn't the best team in the world anymore, but did it tilt the team to lose to another Swedish team?
I don't remember them tilting to it. These losses were pretty rough losses. I don't remember, because we always ended up playing this NYP team in very crucial moments, and yeah, we lost most of the series against them. I think their playstyle was really good against ours, and we also, at that point, we were going through already, like what I mentioned earlier. So we were not at our best, definitely. No, I wouldn't say it dealt to them. I don't think it did. Okay. Yeah, it was mostly an like an alliance thing where like we were just not happy where the team was, and we were going through some internal conflicts. That's mostly what it was.
After the period with Alliance, and this is obviously another year where you didn't get to go to the international, as you referred, you only basically went to your first one, and then you had all these different issues. And sadly, the issues always came around the time. It was always in the lead up to the international where these teams like fall off a cliff and it gets depressing. So I actually have a question along those lines, which is it touches on something you were talking about before when you were like saying about how the scene now is sort of copying almost a meta game of what is the formula of how you build a team that wins TI. Especially because so many of the pro players now, you know, it's not like their first 2 years. Some of them have played half a decade or more, and they're like, right, all I've got left is I just want to win a fucking TI at some point before I retire. I don't want to be the guy who never won it. So as a result, everyone's doing this. And funnily enough, the Chinese scene was always doing that because they all played for like 15 years or whatever, you know. So they're all trying to do this approach. And if you've noticed, there isn't an ideal approach every single year. Like, for example, it does suck that TI's at that particular time of year. And if you're like the godlike team in January, you're probably not going to be the best 7 months later when TI comes, unfortunately. But that's like an irrational way to think about it, because obviously you try to be the best every month of your career, and it's not like you can choose to be bad then and then be good later. Like, it doesn't work that way. So when you've been in a lot of these teams, did you ever identify anything that meant that if you look, the time span for your teams it's something like 4 or 5 months. It's usually early on in the team when things are really good, and then the drop off just coincidentally happens to come in TI, but it's like the few months leading into then the summer into TI. Is there anything you've ever identified about like what is the secret to making a team's like lifespan extended, you know? Because as you said, unfortunately, with Dota players, once you start losing and it becomes like it's more than 1 or 2 times, most people just throw it in and they say, right, let's make a new team, you know, let's start the whole process again. So is there some kind of wisdom you've learned from that, or an approach you take?
I mean, there is some, but it's difficult for me to just like put it out there. But what I can say is that definitely.
I will say, by the way, Mad has actually already said in an interview that he's going to do like a book about all this. So obviously, some of these will be like the insider secrets that we'll all have to buy for $10.99 once he properly retires, right?
I mean, the day I retire, I will definitely, say all these, and because I do feel like sharing it. I feel a lot like sharing it. But now, I mean, what I can say is that a lot of teams look at it for sure. It's like there's this thing that everybody calls like the honeymoon period in a team, where like everything just starts really well. You just like play your best and stuff, and then there's usually these slumps that you have to go through. And as you say, you don't want this to happen at a very crucial moment of the season, where like especially at TI, there's a lot of things, and it got teams to consider. It got me to consider like what is the best way to approach the season and stuff. The truth is, what you said is very true. Like, you don't control these things. So trying to be the best every day without being burned out is definitely the approach you want to go for. It's also very team specific. It depends of the personalities that are on the team, the way they deal with the work and with pressure. That's a really big part of it. Whether how much they need to rest. How do they what kind of balance can they find for themselves, like as individuals and for the team as a unit. I think it's very team specific. All in all, I've had different structures to like how to approach practice, how to approach the rhythm during the season, and it changed from one team to the other. And I don't think there's one that I can pick that I thought to myself like that was the absolute best. I can definitely go back to certain teams and be like, for that team specifically, this is at that point we found the right balance. For that team, we didn't. Like, that's pretty much how it went down.
Okay. When you had the down period where either you didn't qualify for international, or you had that period before Alliance where you were doing some analysis at events, you were appearing on desks, etc. I saw an interview with you from this year where you were actually You were very frank, actually, and basically just said that you think that some of the commentators have like pretty poor understanding of the game. We're talking about on like a strategical level here, you know, obviously they know what the heroes do, etc. It's just that, you know, sometimes they would make the classic mistakes that, you know, a lot of casual fans were like, I do when I watch the game. Like, you know, I'm the idiot who thinks that the person who just got all the kills in the team fight carried the team fight. Whereas, you know, the more I learn about it, the more I talk to intelligent people, they'll tell me, no, actually, the support there got that stun off and a disabled here. It's like the other guy would have died 10 minutes ago. Well, metaphorically, you know, he would have died way before that. He never could have done that. So, you know, you're looking at the wrong place there. But that's obviously part of the problem of not being a top pro player. And I noticed the way you framed it was very interesting, because you didn't just purely frame casters like they're idiots. They're all like, you know, silver players, like 2K MMR or whatever. But you did say that the reason you were concerned about it is because you feel like if you're an analyst or a caster, you do have a responsibility for what you say. Because the problem is, like I say here, the person who's the casual watching the game like me, who doesn't know that much in depth, I am kind of listening to the caster. If the caster's telling me, oh, this guy's going crazy, I'm thinking in my brain, well, he's carrying the fight, you know. And so unfortunately, I might either overhype one guy or never know that I'm sort of dissing a guy who was doing everything when he seems like he didn't do that great in the game. Or as you were saying about the Socks example earlier, it looked like his laning phase was shit, but I don't know that he actually sacked it and he gave the resources to someone else. And maybe that was actually the like superstar sacrifice move that won you the game, you know.
Yes.
Obviously it's hard and there is that responsibility, but it's also like a really fine line. So I want to pick your brain on this a little bit, because I will say this, okay? Right, in Dota, I know very little because I just watch it as a casual. So almost everything I'm saying could be pure shit. Might not know anything. I'm not sure what I know. In CS, though, a game that I've watched, like I might have watched every big CS game ever. Like luckily I was there at the beginning. But even so, I'll tell you, when I'm on desks and analysis scenarios, I'm talking a lot of shit. Like, you know, I'm making a lot of it up at the time. Or even if there's some basis to what I'm saying, I'm having to like come up with a new composition of it, you know. I'm having to stir a bit of this in and a bit of that, and how much of time I've got to talk. So it's also really, really tricky. So when you were an analyst, when you did this, how would you grade yourself? Do you think you did a good job?
That's a good question. That's a good way to ask it. Well, to my defense, when I was an analyst, I couldn't speak completely free about what I thought about the game. So that was like one thing where like I can't just like go all out, because that would hurt the competitive edge that I have.
You didn't want to give up too much stuff?
Yes, definitely. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, there is one thing that is true to everybody, is that, so I mean, I'm gonna keep answering that question, but I want to go back a little bit on what you said, because this is a very like important topic to me, in the sense that, so the casters, first of all, they have to be aware of the responsibility, really the responsibility that they have, and I don't think they are in most cases. And this is not me blaming. This is just like me looking at facts. I think they underrate how much they can build stories, build players, and break them. Because they probably have a very humble approach to what they do, which is good, which is great. But what they do has like a lot of impact. So let's say they're gonna praise a player a lot, right? Or they're gonna like not flame him, because they don't flame, but they're gonna like question him a lot. This is gonna like impact the fans, all the fans. So you have the players that keep the channel between them and fans very open, that are you have no mental preparation in Dota. There's no such thing. You don't have like a mental coach. You don't have a guy that helps you prepare, helps you deal with the pressure. Like these players, they go to the social medias and they just read. Like some of them, they just read all the messages. So that gets to them directly, you know, like it just hurts them straight up, or it like gives them fire and confidence right away. So that's already a huge impact. Like that's the first one. Even for the players that don't let this get to them, right? That they have this experience knowing that it's not good for me to look at these things, because sometimes they help me stay strong, and sometimes they just like they hurt me. And no matter what, like I should be getting that toughness, mental toughness from somewhere else. Like this is too unstable for me to.
Well, that's one thing, you know, that I think a lot of people don't understand, is that it's not even about like being weak as a person. Because for example, as a person, if I'm one-on-one, people could say anything to me. Like I not from birth, but you know, through life experience, I think I can handle it. You know, I could rationalize it away. But the difference is, if a lot of people were all saying stuff, even if 99% of them bounce off, there's still a lot getting through there. You know,
and I'm gonna give you.
It still hurts a bit, no matter what.
Exactly. I'm gonna give you a very an even better example. If you don't let it get to you, let's say you just close the channel between you and like social medias.
Sure.
Now, people that are like very close to you, your relatives, for example, I'll just take myself as an example, like my brother or my parents, let's say, they read this because they have nothing else. Like they have no information to get, right? I'm on the road, I'm practicing, I'm playing. They don't get to just like talk to me as much as they would want to. They can't just ask people around like, how is he doing and stuff. So they're going to be reading what people think, like people that know more about the game than they do. They're going to be listening to fans. They're going to be listening to analysts. And one day I'm going to have a private talk with them, and I know that they only want their best, and they might end up being like, are you sure that what you're doing right now is what you're really good at? You know, they're just trying to help because they feel like they need to help, because they've read what people said, what people wrote, like, oh, that doesn't work. You know, that guy doesn't work for that team, blah, blah, blah. And then they're going to be like, are you sure you're good with that team? You know, and it gets to you in a way. Like you close the door and it comes from the window now, and you're kind of helpless. Like it just keeps coming. And even though you fight it, now you're also using energy, like fighting this, and you can turn it into fire, which is what I try to do. But no matter what, like this, there is like kind of a channel that is open, and casters, they set the tone for what's going to be said. You know, if all the casters are going to start praising like completely fake one player at TI, like if there's going to be a running joke where we're all going to say how that player A is the best player that has ever played Dota, it might just happen. It might be a thing at the end of the tournament, because it's like the hype of the moment, to everything, and it's going to start like I think a good circle where that guy's going to get confidence from all the good, like the positive comments he's getting, and the confidence is going to help him play better, and la la la. And it's going to, and the same happens where like some players just people break them with this. It's the way I look at it. I've seen it happen around me, and it hurts me a lot because I've seen talent wasted. And of course, when it's positive, then I think it's good. But when I see talent wasted, and then I go on a cast and I listen to it, it feels really bad. It just hurts me, and it's the reason why I came up with that tweet. And people are going to say, "Oh, now he's disregarding casting, he's being arrogant." But it just hurts me to see that guy getting broken, even though he's talented and he deserves much more. He sacrificed so much, and he could get there. He's gonna get there. I don't want this to stop him from getting there. Obviously, who am I to want something for him and stuff? It's just me being hurt, you know, as a human being, and then I want to do something about it. And my way to help is being like, yo, guys, you have a responsibility. You can't just say whatever you can. And I mean, of course, in theory they can say whatever they can, and if that's how it is, that's how it is. But at least I think it's not. I think it's not optimal. In my ideal world, and I know it's not how it works, and usually the answer I get from fans like, yo dude, like this happens in sport, so why are you complaining?
Sure.
But I'm not the kind of guy. I don't want sport. I don't want esports to match sport. I want esport to be better than sports. Maybe I just want esport to be itself. And in my ideal esport world, there is like people understand like what their responsibility is. People understand that players are people who are chasing their dreams, just the same way the guy that writes this comment also has dreams in his life. He's also chasing, and these players don't come to him and try to like talk him down or push him away from whatever he's trying to chase. In my ideal world, they will also try to support him and help him get there in their own way. But that's just me being maybe too naive or something, but it's the way I look at it. And I do believe that it's hard for casters also. I mean, I understand that it's very hard, because I also said that game understanding might not be that good sometimes. And it's also the big difference with sports is like football or basketball, whatever, like these sports, they don't change, like, or like very minor changes. Esports, Dota, it changes every second week. And even myself, let's say I go away like for 4 months, I'm gonna come back. I want TI this year. I'm gonna come back in 4 months. If I don't watch anything, I don't play at all, my view on the game will be much worse than what it is today. And I'm gonna say things commentating on the game that are not, they're wrong. It's not what just happened. I just did not understand what just happened, and I'm trying to entertain. Which if that's the job, then they do an amazing job, like a better job than I would ever do. Like they're amazing, and I listen to them. And they help me like enjoy the games much more. Like there's like emotions are involved. It's just amazing. I think they're amazing professionals. But it's just how it is. Like sometimes you just can't keep up with the brains of the best players that are doing this 12 hours a day every day. It's just how it is. Like they can't do it themselves if they stop. It's not about who you are. It's about what your job is. And your job is not to be like the best player in the world. So you're probably not going to think as well as the best player in the world. It's just not going to happen. So then your job is to entertain, and your job is not to try to read what happened, or as in like have an opinion on what happened, because you don't understand as well what happened. You will never understand as well as the 10 players in that game what just happened. That's just how it is, and you have to accept it. So your job now becomes to how to make the most out of the information that you have.
Okay,
yeah, sure.
So a follow-up I have to that then. Because the problem with this is it's obviously like a very tricky scenario. And in fact, some of what you were complaining about there, I totally agree with. And if I was a player, that's the thing people don't always understand, right? Okay, so in my game, I'm not just somebody who's critical, but yeah, I am. I mean, it's kind of my style. I'm a bit rude about how I do it. It's kind of like, I'm not entirely like that as a person, but there's definitely that element in me I sort of let out, when I do it, But the problem that people don't realize is I know a lot of pro players on a friendly basis outside of the game, where I'm totally the person who might be the understanding ear to them, telling them, I know, yeah, it seemed really bad what happened there, and you're doing a good job, and you're trying to plug away, But one of the problems I have noticed is, another reason it happens, and so what I'm alluding to there is, like, that's going to be a never-ending discussion between casters and players anyway. We're never going to get to a perfect scenario where we all have exactly, like, the things that we all want to say and all want to hear. But one thing I will say to you and to pro players generally is, another problem is, when players get criticised by casters or analysts, they get defensive, understandably, because one of the first things you can think to yourself is, even if I am doing something wrong, and even if I had a bad game, if you know that I don't actually know the reasons why you had a bad game, you can get defensive then. You can ignore that you had a bad game and just go, right, well, you don't even know why though, so shut up about it. Like, don't talk about it, you don't understand. But I will say this. Anytime a player comes to me, a pro player, and this is the tough part, because why would he want to come to me? I'm the guy who seemingly is talking shit about him and is making people dislike him. But if a player ever comes to me, whether this is just online, shoot someone a message, or come to them in person, and in a manner where it's like, listen, maybe you don't know how our team works. Like in my particular team, I play this role and I do this certain thing here. And you know what? Even if it looks at that point, actually, like I was doing badly. Yeah, in another game, I was doing badly. But in this particular game, actually, I was trying to do the right decision there. And, it didn't work out and we lost again. Just knowing some of the context usually does make it easier to think the way you're thinking now. Like that way, even if I flame him a bit, like he might still be one of the worst players at his position, I might at least be able to convey some of that in my analysis. Like, okay, he did badly here, but you know what? In his team, he's not always supposed to do some of the things we think of for this position. So it's really tough to do because you have to sort of, it sounds like we're terrorists who are making you negotiate with us. But the more that you get of information like that from players, yeah, you're not just going to repeat what he says, but it gives you a wider perspective, because what I was kind of saying with my point about analysis is, it's like someone puts a mic in front of me and they say, like, talk for a minute now about that game. And I'm going to have to say whatever I can think of in that moment. And so some of it's going to be good. Some of it might be utter shite. Like I might not have thought that much about the team. I might not know any of the players. So I would just say to pros, it's tough because these guys seem like the enemy, but that's why I always try and stress personally, like, think of it like the WWE, World Wrestling Federation, right? That old thing from America, right? The whole reason why that's a great concept is, even if they seem to be fighting each other, they're all working for the WWE. And as long as the WWE gets great ratings, everyone wins. So if you think of it like that, like we're all part of the show, as much as it might seem like we're the guys just talking, I think that's like the mentality where we can all help each other, because I agree with you. It's not an ideal scenario. And I definitely agree with the part about just because sports is we're all horrible to celebrities doesn't mean we should want to be in esports. Like that sucks as well. I would hope I could, like, I actually have to say, I will fully admit the more I've gotten some esports fame, the nicer I am to celebrities. Like I don't wreck them as much as I used to. I don't be as much of an asshole and judge a guy, I don't know his story, but it's tough though. I agree. That's a very, very tough line to walk.
No, I mean, it is for sure. I mean, you said a lot of right things, and I agree with most of them. It's just sometimes heartbreaking to see that certain players, like, they get a lot of criticism.
Yes.
And it gets to their heads. Like, I can tell that they ended up being convinced. And like, for example, I mean, I have a read on the game that is obviously, like, most of the time better than the average fan, because I'm just in it. I'm not saying that it's because because of me versus whoever. It's like, it's just like, that's my work. Like, I invest much more time than they do. Therefore, I know more. It's just like, as simple as it is. And then I look at that player and I disagree with what is being said. And if I see that he ends up being convinced, like, I'm gonna take a very simple example. It's like, when Anna joined OG, like, had he listened to all the crap people wrote and said, they probably would have made him a really bad player. That guy would have never won TI. I would not protect him from all this bullshit that people were saying, and the casters included. Like, yeah, it was like, that guy has a very bad early game. This guy has this and that. I don't even know. Like, I don't even want to know what they're saying. But I just know that there's a chance he would never have gone anywhere. Today, that guy won TI, and he played a huge part in the TI win, and that guy's gonna keep achieving great things in Dota, and that's definitely, now maybe it's gonna, whatever people say about him is gonna help him become even better. But it's just sad, you know. I think it's there's a lot of talents that are being wasted, and people that give up and stop chasing their dreams because they let criticism get to them. And criticism is sometimes it's how to put it, like, it's justified.
Sure.
Sometimes it isn't, and when it isn't, then it's a rough spot to be in. Obviously, this is not me like judging the casters' work. Like, they do an amazing work, and it's also up to the players to not let that get to them, right? It definitely is, but it doesn't make it less true that it could be much more help than what it is today. Of course, it's not supposed to be help, but as you said, like, everybody's in the same boat, and it's a good way to look at it.
Believe it or not, that was only part one of my lengthy reflections interview with fucking.mad. Part two will be out tomorrow. It's even longer, and of course, we dive deep into OG, who he coached and played for. This video was kindly supported by Gardner Wilson, Dean Tanglis, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingforce, Andreas Snazor Westerland, Godawful Waste of Space, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, James Harding, Daniel Yordanov, Vexy, Robert Baxter, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to appear in my content? Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers for upcoming content and guests? Want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today. Link in the description box.